Bienvenido a un contenido de la Cátedra Europa. La Universidad del Norte les da a todas y todos la más cordial bienvenida y se complace en contar con la presencia de todos ustedes en el 11º Seminario de Educación e Infancia, Alternativas pedagógicas para aprender a leer en el mundo de hoy. Este evento ha sido posible gracias al liderazgo del Instituto de Estudios en Educación y el trabajo colaborativo de la Cámara de Comercio de Barranquilla, la Secretaría de Educación Departamental, la revista Contexto Media, el Banco Mundial, UNICEF, la Academia Colombiana de Ciencias, Fundación Nueva Aventura y, por supuesto, gracias a todo el equipo de la Universidad del Norte. Presiden este acto el doctor Adolfo Meisel, rector de la Universidad del Norte, el doctor José Aparicio, director del Instituto de Estudios en Educación, la doctora Elsa Escalante Barrios, coordinadora de la Maestría en Educación. Y saludamos, por supuesto, de manera muy especial a nuestros conferencistas invitados, a los diferentes medios de comunicación que nos acompañan, a los visitantes y a toda la comunidad académica que nos acompaña el día de hoy. Este Seminario de Educación e Infancia, a lo largo de sus 11 versiones, se ha caracterizado por ser un espacio de encuentro académico y social en el que docentes, investigadores, estudiantes y público en general se encuentran con el fin de debatir interdisciplinariamente todas las investigaciones, tendencias y experiencias relacionadas con los procesos de la educación infantil a nivel local, nacional e internacional. De la misma manera, se ha promovido como una oportunidad para difundir e intercambiar conocimientos y experiencias científicas. Se contará con la participación de expertos nacionales e internacionales, quienes se encargarán de dinamizar estos espacios de diálogo con la comunidad académica y científica, entidades gubernamentales vinculadas con las temáticas que se abordarán en este seminario. En el día de hoy queremos que sean todas y todos bienvenidos a esta nueva edición que estará llena de grandes experiencias y aprendizajes. Para dar inicio con nuestra agenda, escucharemos las palabras de apertura del doctor Adolfo Meisel, rector de la Universidad del Norte.
Muy buenos días. Yo había dicho que yo no iba a hablar, pero bueno, me dicen que voy a hablar, entonces voy a dar simplemente un saludo. Realmente este es un tema trascendental para el país, para la calidad de la educación. Y si hay alguna región donde esto es especialmente importante, es esta región del Caribe colombiano. El principal obstáculo que tenemos para avanzar en nuestro desarrollo económico es el bajo capital humano que tenemos. Y como lo ha mostrado una y otra vez la iniciativa ciudadana Casa Grande Caribe, el principal obstáculo para avanzar en el capital humano no es escasez de recursos, sino falta de voluntad política de nuestra dirigencia para priorizar la inversión en capital humano. Descuidándola, los indicadores son, yo hablaba con nuestro distinguido conferencista del día de hoy, que me decía que era importante tener indicadores. Una de las cosas buenas que tiene Colombia en educación es buenos indicadores de calidad. Las pruebas, saber qué hace el ICFES, el Ministerio de Educación, en diferentes niveles de educación, saber 3, saber 5, saber 11, saber pro cuando terminan los estudiantes, son pruebas muy buenas desde el punto de vista técnico y coinciden esos resultados con lo que uno sabe. Y el país no está convergiendo en sus regiones, estoy hablando más de lo que debía hablar. Así que no está convergiendo. Entonces, esto es un tema fundamental. Y en la base de la calidad de la educación está la lectura, donde tenemos unos índices de lectura en el país bajísimos. Creo que el volumen de libros leídos per cápita en Colombia está alrededor de 2 algo, cuando hay países como Finlandia que tienen más de 17. Entonces, le doy la palabra, no hablo más para que escuchamos a los que saben. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos al doctor Adolfo Meisel por sus palabras. De esta manera daremos paso a la conferencia inaugural Aprender a leer en el mundo actual. Cómo aprender a leer cambia el cerebro, implicaciones para la educación, a cargo de nuestro invitado internacional, el doctor Stanislas Duan. El doctor Duan es neurocientífico cognitivo, ocupa la cátedra de Psicología Cognitiva Experimental en el Collège de France de París y es director de Neurospin, el Centro Francés de Investigación Avanzada en Imagen Cerebral. Hoy tenemos el honor de recibir en Cátedra Europa a uno de los más reconocidos expertos mundiales en neurociencias y su aplicación a la educación, ganador además del Brain Prize, que es considerado el Premio Nobel de las Neurociencias. Bienvenido, doctor Duan.
Gracias. Buenos días a todas y todos. And that will be all my Spanish for today. Sorry about that. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the introductory words from the president. Could I have the first slides? Indeed, I will be talking about how we learn, and especially how we learn to read will be the topic of this lecture. Reading is probably the most important single development that we add through education to our human brain. Without reading, our civilization would not exist. And yet somehow we don't pay enough attention to how we learn to read. And I will try to show you that we understand so much about how the human brain learns to read that we now are in a situation where we can really be much more efficient in reading acquisition. And I hope this will be applied in this country in particular, but throughout the world. So this is the place that I direct. It's called Neurospin. Each of these arches hides a machine for brain imaging. So we have 3 scanners, including the world's largest MRI scanner for human subjects at 11.7 Tesla. We also have machines to watch the electrical and magnetic activity of the brain. Let me try to remove this. Oh. Now, I think I made something wrong. Sorry about that. I thought it would occult the message, but not the slides. Try again. Yes, wonderful. So various machines to look at the animal brain and even to try to go to the cellular level and understand the neural networks at the level of individual cells. But our specificity, as my wife Ghislaine will also describe in the next talk, is that we can use all of these tools to study the child's brain and even the infant's brain and to understand development in its biological basis. All that we learn is, of course, inscribed in neural networks in our brain, in the changes of synapses in the brain, and we are beginning to understand that. And my first message, which will be amplified by Ghislaine, is that we don't start from zero. The human brain is extraordinarily organized, and in particular for spoken language, not written, but spoken language, the human brain has specialized networks right from the start. This is part of being a Homo sapiens. We are all Homo sapiens. We all have brain networks in the left hemisphere, which you can see here are already working in the first year of life. In fact, in the first months of life. We were the first to scan babies in fMRI at 2 months and have them listen to language and show that already you can see the same areas as you would see in an adult brain. Of course, the baby does not yet know vocabulary or syntax, but he's already learning using a specialized network. And by the time that the child is entering school or even preschool, he has a very organized spoken language network. So we don't start from nothing. And reading will encroach upon the networks for spoken language. In fact, in all of you in this room, because you have become experts in reading, the networks for spoken language and for written language are very, very similar. This is a wonderful, very detailed work from Jack Gallen's lab in California. And what they have here is they have people listen or read materials, stories. Did you have a pointer? That would be even nicer. Or maybe it's here. I think I found it. Great. And yes, this is a pointer. So this is listening to stories. This is reading stories. And in people who are expert, the images are extremely similar. These are images of meaning. So each of the colors indicate different aspects of meaning, such as social, persons mentioned in the story, maybe numbers. Numbers are in green. Tomorrow I will talk more about that. But the point is that the images are very similar. Once you know how to read, you use the same brain areas to understand the message. There is a convergence to the same brain systems. But of course, you have to learn to read. And to learn to read is essentially to connect vision to spoken language. So this is a caricature now of the spoken language area, Broca's area and the temporal lobe. They are all working for spoken language. What happens when you learn to read? When you learn to read, you're going to enter this system through vision rather than through spoken language. And you're going to use, of course, your visual cortex at the back of the brain, but also develop a specialized region, which I've called the visual word form area or the brain's letterbox. It's an area that specializes for recognizing letters in the reading scheme that you are learning, in the alphabet that you are learning, and connects it to the rest of the language system. And in particular, at the beginning, to the phonemic representation in the planum temporale, where we encode the phonemes of language. So basically, learning to read is very simple. It's to add a visual interface to the spoken language system. Okay. And the key link here is between graphemes, the letters, and phonemes, the sounds of language. Grapheme to phoneme translation. That is the beginning of the reading system and the key on which we need to push in order to have fast reading acquisition. So first, I want to show you some of the science and of brain imaging of reading. What changes in the brain when we learn to read? You can't read this. If you had learned hieroglyphs, you would be able to. What would have changed? So we did experiments where we compared the brains of literate and illiterate people. We went to Portugal, to Brazil. We scanned some people who are completely illiterate, can read 0 words per minute, but came just from families that didn't have the possibility of sending their children to school. Maybe sometimes in the very same village, maybe the first child could be sent to school, but not the second one for poverty reasons. So we scanned them both, and we had a whole hierarchy of people from completely illiterate, some ex-illiterates who could have learned maybe in their environment without going to school, and people like you and I who have been to school and can read very well. And we looked at correlation of brain activity. This is brain activity as a function of this reading score, which is simply you can measure in 1 minute how many words can a person read quickly and correctly in 1 minute. So you can see that there's a whole network of regions that is being read here, which is strongly correlated with reading score. The more you can read, the more you activate, as I say, the left hemisphere language region, including Broca's area here. By flashing words on the screen and asking people if they can read them, you see more and more activation according to reading score. But you also see activation in the ventral part of the brain. This is visual areas that have become tuned to the shapes of written words. We also see, quite surprisingly, even for auditory cortex, you see now we are talking about spoken sentences or spoken words, there is more and more activation, even in the spoken language, in people who have learned to read. This is quite surprising, but perhaps you know about phonemic awareness, phonological awareness. The more you can read, the more you develop your sense of the fine-grained resolution of phonemes. And we also found that the connection between these two systems is being developed, even anatomically speaking. So once again, visual activation, auditory activation, the link between the two. Okay. Here is this little area that I want to talk about, this visual word form area. This is the brain of an illiterate person. You see some responses to faces and houses and tools. There is specialization of the brain for these categories. With reading, you develop more specialization for this particular category of visual image, the word, the written word, with its letters and so on. And as you do so, I won't have time to discuss too much, but you reorganize this system. You may see that the response to faces is decreasing in the left hemisphere and moving to the right hemisphere. So we see a decrease of the responses to faces and movement to the right hemisphere, because essentially you need to make space in your brain for this special knowledge of recognizing letters. So all of you in this room, you have changed your brains, and this, I will show you, occurs in just a few months or years in young children. So what do we know about this visual word form area, which is here? This has been really something we've studied in the lab for 20 years now. We know a lot about this region. So how is it? First of all, it's always located in the same site within 1 centimeter in all of you. I could take any person in this room, bring them to Neurospin, scan you in 5 minutes. You have this spot in the brain that responds to letters and strings of letters. In all cultures, whether you're Chinese, French, reading Hebrew, it's the same. It will activate to written words more than to any other category. You can see some image here in the bottom, for instance, just a response to words in these little clusters of the cortex, and not to other categories like faces, but even numbers. This is a high specialization for letters. It will activate to the scripts you know. It will not activate to Chinese if you have not learned Chinese, or to Hebrew if you have not learned Hebrew, but it will activate to these reading systems if you have learned them. And if you have a lesion to this area, like here, this is a very small surgical lesion for epilepsy, you can see that this person lost the ability to read. Any of you could lose the ability to read if you had a lesion in this area. It is completely unconscious. So this activation, for instance, was obtained by subliminal presentation of words. Once you've learned to read, you don't even realize how it works. It's completely transparent. It will activate unconsciously in your brain. And that's part of the problem, because when you teach reading, many teachers forget how difficult it was to learn to read, because it's completely unconscious now, right? But you need to go back to the time where it was difficult. Now, with our new scanners, this is an image at 7 Tesla, we can image that in individual people at very high resolution. These are 1.2 millimeter voxels, so very small, very precise images of the brain. And we can see very small patches of cortex that specialize for words. You can see them here. What we thought was a star is actually a galaxy. And we have very precise regions of the cortex that respond just to words. And we can also study the properties and see that they have learned the statistics of the language. So here you see we always present strings of letters, but these are real words in French or in English. This is a bilingual subject. And these are completely impossible strings of letters, rare letters. And in between, we have approximations of the statistics of French and English. And you can see that these voxels, in the back of the brain, it does not make any difference, because visually they're all the same. They're all strokes on the screen. But within these specialized patches, you have a very strong increase in the response for stimuli that approximate the statistics of the known language. So the brain is a statistician. The brain compiles the statistics of letters. And that takes a little time. You need experience with the language. We can make some funny discoveries. Here we were scanning a person with bilingual in English and Chinese, and we scanned quite a few of these people. So we designed the same sort of stimuli. You can see approximations of English and approximation of Chinese, more and more closer to Chinese here. And what we found was that there are some patches still that respond exactly the same to both English and Chinese. You can see this increase in activation here for this stimuli. The same way, this is in the green patch here, the visual word form area. But we also discovered that there can be patches that are completely selective for Chinese. They just like this particular writing. And you can see just a response to Chinese and just a response to Chinese here. So we're still exploring this, but it gives you an example of plasticity of the brain. The brain will specialize for what you are learning. And here, Chinese and English are sufficiently different that you specialize different parts of cortex for it. And we're still not explaining this fully, but Chinese and faces overlap in the brain. So maybe Chinese characters are a bit more like faces. They are holistic. Can we do the same work in children as they learn to read? Well, yes, we can. We can bring children safely in the fMRI, in the scanner, and we can scan them before and after learning to read. This is one of the first images that we did some years ago, about 10 years ago. So if you scan a 9-year-old and they have learned to read properly, the circuit for reading is fully in place. You can see this very strong activation to words compared to other categories such as faces or houses or checkerboards. And you can see these different patterns of specialization. All of you in this room, starting from the age of 8 or 9, you have this mosaic of areas that respond selectively to different categories of words, of objects or visual scenes. Take now a 6-year-old who cannot read, and you see the organization is very different. There is no specialization for words and less specialization for faces. We can't see it here. But if you take a 6-year-old who has learned to read, now you see the beginning of the visual area here. You see this mosaic of area is organized by learning to read, and it can go very quickly. It depends solely on having had the chance to be exposed to a good reading method or manual. We have had the chance to do that much more precisely within subjects. We got the permission to have 10 children come to Neurospin regularly and be scanned successively, repeatedly, as they were learning to read. And I love this experiment. We were able to get 2 scans before they entered school, and we chose children who could not read. And then we had 4 scans all along the first school year when they were learning to read. And so we could see what's changing in their brain. And finally, we got 1 scan 1 year later when they were more automatized. Reading was becoming automatized. So this is just behavioral findings of the development of reading in these children. Each color is 1 child, and this is as a function of time. 0 is the moment when they enter school here. And you can see that very quickly, with a proper teaching, the kids develop knowledge of grapheme-phoneme relationships. You show them a letter and they know the corresponding sound. And that can go very quickly. About half of the year, that's enough to get grapheme. Slowly is fluency, the capacity to read a certain number of words per minute quickly, right? The speed of reading gets faster and faster here in these children with some variability again. And that, of course, is the goal, that you are able to read automatically, fluently, and of course, to understand what you are reading. So what happened in the brain? Here's the brain of 1 child, and we have 10 children like this. They're all about the same. So the first 2 scans before school, you see very little response to written words. The image is showing the response to written words more than to other categories of visual stimuli, like faces. And you can see that as soon as they enter school, we are now talking about November, just a few months of school, 2 months of school, you see strong responses to words in the visual word form area, in the temporal lobe, and also in the parietal and prefrontal cortex. I'm going to zoom in this ventral visual region, and you see these very strong clusters of activation that are growing and growing and growing, right? But the point is that it can go very quickly. In just a matter of a few months, you begin to have these responses at the place where they are going to be in the final stage. And to compare, this is the development of faces. Faces are rather stable. You see very little change as a function of time. If you were zooming in, you would see small changes, but it's going slowly. Whereas when you enter school and you focus on reading, there's a strong, quick development of the reading system. So we were able to dissociate age versus reading acquisition, because there is a little bit of variability in the age at which you acquire reading and in the speed with which you acquire reading. By having a large number of children here, we were able to have some children who could not read. And again, we compared word versus other pictures, right? We had young children who could read and begin to read. You see some activation here in green, and advanced readers. And we made this discovery, which is very simple, that if you look at words, what counts is the effect of reading independently of age. Regardless of the age at which you begin to learn to read, with some variability between 5, 6, or 7 years in France, it's the reading score that predicts the activation here. In fact, by measuring this activation, we can capture about 50% of the variability in reading, right? This is quite spectacular. It means that about 50% of the differences between children in reading scores can be directly measured in a few minutes by looking at their brains, right? Anything you learn, of course, is written in the brain, but we can read it now. But the situation is different for faces. For faces, it's age that counts and not reading experience. You slowly accumulate evidence about meeting people, seeing a lot of faces, and that changes your brain slowly. What happens with reading is we focus the experience at a very precise moment. You enter school, you are going to learn to read. You get a lot of stimulation about reading. And then I will develop this system in just a few months. That's how it should be done. So this is a little view, cartoon view of what might be happening. Before going into school, you already have visual cortex, where there are some areas that respond to tools, some to faces, some to houses, and there are still some areas that are plastic, labile. They can change. Because you go to school, some of these areas will focus on learning the shapes of words. If you didn't go to school, the same areas would become invaded by representations of objects and faces, and you would lose the ability to learn words. This is our current thinking about the system, and it means that if you scan the same person, you would see, oh, this region does not respond to words, it responds to faces or to objects, which is exactly what we see in our experience, in our experiments. Okay, so we're specializing an area. Now, a key challenge for us, I want to speak a little bit about neuroscience now. This is really to understand what goes on in this circuit. How does this circuit function at the neural level? With brain imaging, we cannot see single neurons. We can see voxels, about 1 millimeter. There are still several tens of thousands of cells inside, and we want to understand how it works. So to do that at the moment, we are developing artificial neural network simulations. I think you all know about the advances in artificial intelligence and the artificial neural networks. So what we do is we take a network that has learned to recognize images. This is called ImageNet. It's a data set where you have millions of images, and there are 1,000 categories of images. So this network has a number of stages. They look a little bit like the cortex, V1, V2, V4, inferotemporal cortex. They are equivalents in this model. And it's trained to take an image and say, oh, this is a face. Okay, 1 out of 1,000 output categories. And once we have this network, we turn it into a literate network. We add another 1,000 outputs, which are the identity of the words. So maybe there's the word horse. And if you get the word horse as the input, you have to light up a particular unit at the output. So we retrain the network to become literate. And we find that this network can simulate what's going on in the brain. For instance, we see the appearance of units that are tuned to letters and words and respond only to letters and words, but not to faces or bodies or houses and so on, just like in the brain, just like the visual word form area. And we can analyze these regions and make predictions about the neurons that are in there. We predict that there will be neurons that are specialized for the shapes of letters at certain locations. For instance, this unit likes the letter A on the left side of the word, so maybe position 1 or position 2 from the left. Another unit likes the letter R and likes it on the right, maybe not the very last letter, but the one from the last. So this is a new prediction that we are making now, that for each word, there is a sort of barcode made of cells that respond selectively to the letters. And altogether, each word has a particular barcode. And if you're a good reader, you have sharp barcodes that sharply distinguish between the different words. So we begin to understand a little bit better what's going on, and we think it's very parallel to face recognition. In the case of face recognition, we can, of course, study it in the monkey. So we have a lot of knowledge of the individual neurons that do the job. And this has been studied in particular by Doris Tsao in California. She's recording from electrodes that can pick up individual cells. And so we understand, first of all, it's very similar to words. There are patches of cortex that are organized in the monkey brain that responds to faces. And we understand that there's a hierarchy of synapses with very narrow receptive fields that pick up details of the face, but progressively you see a response to the whole face. And we know that there are neurons that care about dimensions of face variation. For instance, whether the eyes are more to the right of the face or to the left, whether they are on the top or on the bottom, whether they are spaced or not, and many, many dimensions of phase variation are responded to by individual neurons. We think something very similar is happening with words. Initially, I thought there was just a very similar hierarchy of responding to more and more combinatorial properties of letters. For instance, initially there would be a neuron that responds to the capital letter E. Maybe at the higher level, you can respond to E in capitals or in lowercase. And then neurons that respond to E left of N, which are called bigram neurons. And finally, a whole word. Now, with analyzing this network, we have been able to refine this picture. And this is not yet published, but it will soon be published. The refinement is that we find that the network that we have trained, it actually has what we call space bigrams. It cares about the presence of a space and a letter. So we find neurons that care about a space and the letter R. And that will be a detector of the letter R at the beginning of the word. Other neurons care about space and a little bit further the letter E. And that would be a detector of E in the second position, and so on and so forth. And you find neurons that care about each of these positions here, at the beginning and at the end of the word. And together, these space bigrams give you a combinatorial code that can encode any word. It just tells you what are the letters in the different positions. And we see it emerging in the network that learns to read. If you want, there are a few more seats, just there, yeah, and there. Yeah. Okay, so this was the story of natural reading. Now, what happens in people who struggle to learn to read? Perhaps children with dyslexia, or just children who have a bad experience in being taught to read. Well, we have been able to scan children of the same age, in this case 9-year-olds, but who could not read very well. And this was the work of Ghislaine and her team. And the finding, as you can see, is very clear. The development of this visual word form is not normal in children who cannot read very well. They are 9-year-old, they should be able to have this activation, but they don't, right? And in fact, we also see that the change in the face system is not done. Right? So they have, the normal children have, normal readers have more activation for words in the left hemisphere, more activation for faces in the right hemisphere. This reorganization has not happened normally in children with dyslexia or with difficulties in reading. One very important point, this is correlation. It's not necessarily the cause of dyslexia. It just means that we have a biomarker of dyslexia. Here we can see a lack of activation. It's very systematic, correlate of not being able to read. But whether it's the cause or not, we will discuss. But before that, I just want to say that this is a universal finding. There is a lack of activation of this reading network, and in particular the visual word form area, anywhere in the world in children who are struggling to read. This is a recent paper where we collaborated with colleagues in China. They did the very same experiment with struggling readers versus normal readers in China, and we compared with France, and we found that there's a completely universal network which is hypoactivated, underactivated in poor readers. You can see this networking, especially including the visual word form area here, and also this superior temporal region more involved in phonological processing. And we find a very strong correlation between reading scores and activation in these regions without any difference, basically, between Chinese and French. There is a universal reading circuit. I think this is important also for the Faculty of Education. Don't think that all children are different from each other. we all have the same Homo sapiens brain, and there's a very tight set of constraints on the circuitry. We all learn to read in the same way throughout the world. We all learn to read using the same circuit. There are universal patterns, there are universal learning rules that we need to take into account. So now we can think a little bit about dyslexias. I want to use the plural here because we understand better and better that there are multiple types of dyslexias. It's not just one type. And if you look at my little diagram, you can understand that there are multiple stages at which things could go wrong. They could go wrong because the kid has an impaired phonology. Maybe they have the wrong representation of phonemes. They can't hear very well the distinction between, say, ba and ga, okay, b and g. That will create problems here learning to read. And we know that there are many dyslexic children that have problems there. They might have problem in the conversion, maybe the connection between graphemes and phonemes, vision and auditory representation of language. If there is a disconnection, you will have trouble. And maybe some kids simply don't learn well enough this connection if they are not taught properly. But there is a third place, which is of course the visual word form area. And now we understand that there might be at least two types of visual dyslexias. One is letter position dyslexia. You might have seen children like this. They make errors in the order of the letters. They swap letters. So you give them form and they might read from, and they swap, especially the middle letters. The position is not very well coded. We think that this is because these cells that are coding for position are not developing very well. And how would you help such a child? Do you have an idea? Well, it's very simple. Space the letters and give them from left to right, so maybe with the finger. So research has shown by Nama Friedman that if you ask the kids to follow with the finger the successive letters in the word, these children are helped a lot because now they know that O is the second and R is the third, and they don't swap them, okay? So very simple way to help these children. I told you there are two types. So now we move to another type, attentional dyslexia, which is simply inappropriate selection of a given word. So imagine that you give these children two words to read, form and pale, and these children might make an error of saying farm, poor. You see what's happening here? The letter A is coming from the second word, but it's being inserted at the exact position in the first word. So there is a mixture of letters from different words. That's why it's called attentional dyslexia, because it looks as if the children are not able to focus a window of attention on one word and avoid getting influenced by the second. Okay? So this is a different form of dyslexia. And how would you cure it? Well, you can give these children a little window. Just cut a piece of cardboard with a window in it, move it across the words, and they will be able to focus on one word at a time and get to read much better. So we see here also that by having a proper model and by questioning exactly the types of errors, trying to diagnose, like Sherlock Holmes, where is this coming from? Why is this particular child having a problem with reading? We can help them. But we need a good model. One thing that we have understood also is what dyslexia is not. You might think that dyslexia is about mirror errors. For instance, this sort of child, you know, this is a child whose name is Leone, and you see that the child has written from right to left, Leone. I'm sure you've seen this in your families or around the children, right? Here is another child, Theodore, it's his name, Ti voglio bene. You see what's happening here? It's every other line is written from right to left. It's called boustrophédon because this is how ancient Greek was written. It's as the ox plows. If you plow a field, you would go like this. So it's clever. You don't have to move the pen too much, but it's also wrong, right? You shouldn't write from right to left. And it's amazing that these children would do this. Who taught them right to left? You know, what's happening? And is this dyslexia? Many people think it's dyslexia. It's not dyslexia. It's normal. It's a normal property. You can see that by a very simple test. You give them a page. You ask them to write their name next to the dot. So here you have Lissy and Maggie. They've written their names next to the dot. But how about here? write your name next to this dot. So Maggie, who is a little bit older, is squeezing all of the letters together so that she can write her name. But Lissy, who is just 1 year younger, she just writes from right to left, no problem. And the same here in the middle to avoid this bar. And if you do this test, you find that 90% of children in the age 5 or 6 will write from right to left. So it's a universal feature. It's not dyslexia. It's just part of how we are built. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is that we have circuits that generalize in mirror image in our brain. Think about this face. It's the same as this one, right? How do you know? You don't have to think. It's just your visual circuits are generalizing left and right. And you can see cells here. This is recorded by Doris Tsao and Winrich Freiwald. You can see cells that respond exactly the same to the profiles in left and right view. Well, that's a problem for reading. For reading, you should not do that. Can you see that these are mirror images? For a reader, we have unlearned this capacity, but we have to unlearn it, and it's a difficulty for every child to realize that mirror letters actually are different, that B and D are different, and so on, and that you should read from left to right. This is something that needs to be taught to overcome this relic from our evolution, the generalization from left to right. So we see here also one theme which is important in my work, this idea of neuronal recycling. We are recycling circuits that evolved for another purpose. In order to learn to read, we recycle visual circuits that have evolved in order to recognize objects and faces, and sometimes they have features that are not very desirable. Okay, I'll quickly finish by mentioning the consequences of these discoveries for how we should teach reading. Can we teach better if we know how it works? And I will be very clear. Yes, we can. And we know now for many years that we must rely on explicit phonics instruction and avoid discovery learning. Okay? I hope you're being taught this in the Faculty of Education because it's really important. So should we just expose children to writing and just hope that they are going to pick it up? Can you read this? Can you figure it out, even by studying it? You know, there was one person on Earth who was able to do it. It's Mr. Champollion. It took him years to figure it out. Can you imagine that kids are going to do it by themselves? No. All right. So don't even try to do it. Just explain to them, like Mr. Champollion did, and now other people could study it. You know, just explain to them how it works. That's explicit phonics instruction. So let's go again at what we are being taught by cognitive science. We are taught that we need to learn the indirect route first, decoding, and then we might automatize and get the more direct route. So on this basis, I wrote this little book, Aprender, leer, to explain the main principles. We need explicit teaching of grapheme to phoneme conversion rule, what is called phonics, to teach this route here. We need a systematic progression. We can start with the simplest letters, the one that are the most frequent, the vowels, for instance, and progressively go to the more difficulties of the language. I should say here that you are so lucky because Spanish is an easy language. Spanish is a regular language, so it shouldn't be difficult for children to learn to read. Just respect the grapheme to phoneme relationships. You need guidance of visual attention from left to right. It's not trivial that the kids have to go from left to right in order to read, and they won't figure it out by themselves if you just flash a word like this. So you can help them, and one way to help them is to associate reading and writing. If you write, and if they learn to write at the same time as they learn to read, they will understand better how the word flows from left to right, and they will memorize the letters better. There is a lot of evidence that writing at the same time as learning to read helps them learn to read. And leave them time enough to automatize the word recognition process. It takes time. The beginning, as we saw, can be very concentrated. In Spanish, typically, you should learn to decipher words, to decode, in just a few months. I would say 3 months, maybe 6 months, at most 1 year, grade 1. At the age of grade 1, every child in Spanish should be able to decode words and to read about 50 words per minute. Shall I repeat that? Every child. Every child. It works. It really works. It's not at all impossible. You may think that it's impossible. It's not at all impossible. It's completely possible by teaching systematically about 2 correspondences between letters and sound per week, which is completely within what children can learn. Just you focus on that. And then after just a few months, everybody can decipher words. And then you need to automatize. So we can speak a little bit about this need for attention and avoidance of the whole language method. What do I mean by this? This is a nice experiment that was done by my colleague Bruce McCandless. They exposed adults to this funny writing system. They designed a new writing system. And they just said, learn these words. So this is the word bin. Okay. But the trick here was that there were 2 groups of people. In one group, they just said, oh, well, this is Chinese. It's a little bit like Chinese. Just memorize these words. There is no particular structure, but this is the word fog, and you just have to memorize it. In another group of subjects, they said, no, well, actually, these signs, you cannot notice it because it's connected, but actually there are letters. This is the first letter, this is the second letter, and this is the third letter. Pay attention to that. And that's the only difference. It's a 1-minute instruction at the beginning, which is whole word versus grapheme phoneme, right? Difference in attention. And the trick is that this was from bottom to top, so it's not so easy to recognize by an adult person. Well, what happened? Completely different results in the 2 groups. In the group that learns grapheme phoneme, normal development of the reading system in the left hemisphere, as I showed you from the beginning. This is from event-related potential, but I hope you can see the left hemisphere response. In the whole language group, you are not training the right circuit. By asking people to guess the whole identity of the word, you are training the right hemisphere circuit. This is not the proper reading circuit. It's in the wrong hemisphere. And furthermore, you have very little transfer. And so there's something interesting. Both groups can learn the first 16 words, but the whole language group has no idea how to generalize to new words, cannot read new words. Only the grapheme phoneme group can read new words because they found the regularity. But these are clever adults. They are in university. They did not figure out by themselves how this worked. They could not figure it out. So think about young children. How can they figure it out by themselves? It's not enough to expose them to whole language. Whole language doesn't work. I don't know if I have time to go too much into detail, but maybe I'll still give you this, the importance of consolidation. So you will start by grapheme phoneme relationships, but initially it's hard. And children are slow in reading, and that's quite okay. But progressively, if they read and read and read, then they will accelerate their reading, and you will get a fluent reader. And so that's the normal development. In the first year of reading time, which is on the y-axis here, is proportional to the number of letters. 2, 3, 4, 5-letter words, okay? The more letters in the word, the more the child has to go one by one, and therefore is getting slower. But you can see what happens in the second year and in the third year, that the kids accelerate massively, and just like you and I, they become parallel, efficient, automatic readers. What happens here is that you recognize every word at the same speed, whether it's a 2-letter word or 5-letter word. And in this room, you can go all the way to 8-letter words with a flat curve like this. Fast, parallel reading. But it's not whole language. It's still recognizing the letters. It's just recognizing the letters in parallel, all at once, rather than one by one, okay? So don't get fooled. It doesn't mean you should do whole language. It's just that the brain has automatized the process of reading. And it's very important because they need to fluidify the reading, automatize it, make it unconscious in order to free their mental resources for other tasks. Maybe understanding what they read, thinking about the math problem that they read, and so on. So let me give you an example of this. Can you read this? This is a little challenge for your brains. Done? So, how is it like to become a child, right? This is what happens when you're a beginner reader. You struggle to decipher this. And did you have the feeling of, whoo, it's going so much better in the last 2 lines, right? Because this is the normal writing. Well, that's the difference between attention-dependent versus automatic reading. And now let me ask you a question. Did you understand what you were reading? Normally, it becomes much harder to understand because you're focusing on the phonology, you're focusing on the translation, and you cannot really focus on the meaning. So that's what I mean by automatization, and that's why it's so important. This is what we saw in our images. The image at the end of 2nd grade, you see the reading system has become very focused on just these 2 areas, and they're talking to each other. This is unconscious, fast, automatized reading. Before that, you have all of this additional activation here in the frontal and parietal lobes. This is attention dependent. You need to get rid of this so that these areas can think about something else. This is the bottleneck of the mind. They need to be able to allow you to understand mathematics or to focus on the meaning and so on. So this is absolutely essential. And that's why you need to have, first, focused phonics, and second, lots of reading to practice the system and make it automatic. So I will close my talk by saying I am the president of the Scientific Council of Education in France, and we are giving this and a lot of other scientific evidence to education. We are sharing data and doing experiments together. In Spanish, we are beginning to translate some of these materials, and in particular, this document you can find about methods and manuals. Impressive, I think, that France has been doing. We have now national tests that are taken by every child in France in 1st grade, in the middle of 1st grade, and at the beginning of 2nd grade. And this is really so that we can determine for every individual child, the teacher can know how to help that child, what sort of areas is in need. And in particular, we measure the reading fluency. And this is something that you could all do in your classrooms here. Just how many words can a child read per minute? This is a measure that we did in 6th grade. In 6th grade, you might think that everybody can read. Well, test it, measure it, use this measure, reading per minute. And you can see that some children are very low. And in fact, we found that only half of French children were meeting the requirement of 130 words per minute. And many were 2 or even 3 years behind in their reading. So I'm not saying France has no problem, not at all. We have the same sort of problems. But by measuring it, you can make teachers aware of it. Essentially, what's good about this is that it sets very precise goals for each class, and the same goals, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of where you are in the country. Everybody is trying to get to the same level. Everybody has the same brain. People from poor families have the same brain, they have the same potential. You have to realize this potential. And the school is even more important. You know, kids from rich families, they will learn to read because there will be compensation from the family, from the grandparents, and so on. We are doing this mostly to reduce the education gap. If you want, and I think we all want in this room, social justice, you need to teach in the proper way. Teaching in the proper way, in the most efficient way, is the best way to reduce this education gap. So this is the situation in France, which is crazy. We have 35 different manuals for reading, and that's why we wanted to review how well they are doing. I will not have time to do this, but I will tell you the situation is not great in France because the majority of teachers choose these manuals on the top, which have so-called mixed method. So we don't have whole language anymore in French, which is good. But what we have now is mixed methods, where you do phonics, but the next day you do whole language, or you ask children to read a whole paragraph. And most teachers choose this, and they ask their kids to do rote memorization of whole words at the same time as doing phonics. And what we find, I will not detail, but we find that the teachers who use these methods have worse results in progression of their kids than the very small minority of teachers who have chosen the pure phonics approach. So we want to shift these numbers, and we want teachers to adopt more of these phonics methods. So let's be very clear. This is what I found in a manual in France. First week, kids are asked to guess what's written here. Can you imagine? Right? Can you? Don't do this. Don't do this. It's ridiculous. Don't do this either. Can you imagine this? Can you read? In here, the letters have been replaced by squares and triangles and circles in order to help the child guess the words, because they think that it's all about top-down guessing. Reading is not guessing. I didn't speak once about guessing in this talk, right? Reading is not guessing. Reading is about getting the information from the individual letters. It's all in the letters. Everything is in the letters. And if there is one letter difference, it can change to another words. And the kids must be able to recognize that. So it's not guessing. Please avoid doing this sort of things and many other crazy things that we find in the manuals. It's much simpler. It's just about teaching how it works from left to right, letter by letter, corresponding sounds. So that's what we are doing now. And I will close with that. We have developed a program with the lab that's called Kalulu. We do it also in Spanish, and I hope we will be able to share it with you. It's being developed in collaboration with Uruguay. We have also a Brazilian version. It's essentially implementing in software and also in a manual the exact ideas that I gave you. So we have mini games that teach and cement grapheme-phoneme relationships. We have a progression of letters. These are the most frequent letters in French, and we progress through the difficulties of French in a very rational manner based on an analysis of the difficulties of French. We have mini games that teach you, first of all, how a letter should sound, and you actually see the mouth of a child pronouncing the letter N, for instance, the sound N, okay? So that helps a lot because you see the gesture that produces the sound. We associate it with one particular word, which is the beginning nut for N, nut, okay? And we also ask the child to write it, trace it on the screen. We can also, within the software, evaluate. So this is what I showed you before, the progression in the reading speed across the successive tests for 2, 3, and 4 letter words is, we can measure it within the software by asking the child to respond to individual words, decide whether they are a word or not. This is a page from the manual. You see how it looks like. I won't go into the details, but this is teaching about a more advanced French grapheme, which is O-I, which is wa. It's pronounced wa in French. You have to learn it. There's no way not to learn it. Well, this is what we do. We teach 2 or 3 graphemes per week, 100% decodable. So this text is not making use of anything that the child cannot read. There is not one letter that the child has not been taught not to read. There is no need for rote learning of any sight words. And these are the pages that the child sees at the age, after 5 months of school. So you see, it can be demanding. There is no picture. The kids can read. They have been taught, and they can read this after 5 months, right? There is no reason not to be able to do this in this country. So, of course, we begin to have randomized control. The kids are making progress. I will conclude because I'm late. So here are my messages. First, the infant brain is a high but it is also endowed with considerable plasticity. And both structure and plasticity are the same. It's the same potential. This is AI. It needs to be fed with structured inputs, a well-designed curriculum for explicit teaching rather than discovery learning. Please respect this computer. Just don't ask it to guess everything. Be based on scientific principles. First of all, knowledge of the brain's learning algorithm. And I try to explain this to you in the case of reading. There's a lot more in the book that I wrote, Como Aprendemos. There are general learning rules that we can all use to learn better. When we don't know, and I wouldn't want to say that we know everything about the brain, we must experiment together in order to decide what works and what doesn't work. Nobody has the full answer yet, so let's do experimentations. But above all, let's accept the results. And in particular in reading, these results that I showed you today, we have them for at least 30 years. We know that phonics works best. Let's just implement it. And I would say very clearly, I want to use the word unacceptable. I think it's just unacceptable that we continue to use the whole language method in a world where we know so much about why it doesn't work so well. With that, muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you. It's a little late. I don't know if we have time for questions. Yeah.
We're going to have the question and answers. Okay. Muchas gracias, doctor Duan, por su intervención. A continuación, abriremos un breve espacio de 3 preguntas por parte del público que serán respondidas por nuestro conferencista. Sin embargo, sí le agradecemos al público, al auditorio, permanecer en silencio y apagar, por favor, sus celulares para evitar también interrupciones. Quien tenga una pregunta, por favor, alce la mano y nuestro equipo del staff les hará llegar el micrófono.
Buenos días. Muchas gracias, doctor Duen, por su excelente presentación. Sí, lo tiene. Dado que básicamente usted plantea que para el aprendizaje de la lectura, el cerebro humano recicla áreas de la corteza visual que venían preparadas para el reconocimiento de caras, eso lleva a la idea de que entonces el aprendizaje de la lectura, siendo un proceso artificial que requiere enseñanza, podría producirse producto de esa enseñanza intensiva desde una cierta edad. Pero en algunos contextos, en algunos países, verbigracia Finlandia, por ejemplo, consideran que hasta los 7 años, aunque hay unos precursores de la lectura, no sería adecuado en realidad insistir en la lectura. En nuestros países latinoamericanos, por el contrario, hay mucha insistencia de hacerlo muy temprano, sobre la base de que en realidad se debe enseñar y se puede enseñar y el cerebro cambia a partir de esa enseñanza, pues uno podría pensar, ¿por qué entonces no comenzar más temprano? Entonces, la pregunta concreta es, desde su conocimiento experto, ¿cuándo debería comenzarse? ¿Cuándo sería adecuado? ¿Y qué potencialidad daría eso de comenzar a los 4 años o, como en Finlandia, esperar hasta los 7?
Right, that's a great question. I think that it's not particularly just the age which counts, it's the preparedness of the child. And so I can speak for a second about the precursors of reading. For a child to learn to read well, you need to have excellent vocabulary in the spoken language and excellent phonology in the spoken language. And that may take some time to develop. Of course, we can help it by stimulating young children with spoken language, but typically it's only around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 that kids are ready with enough vocabulary and enough phonological distinctions in order to learn to read. So it's not so much the age as it is the exposure to spoken language. And preschools should really focus on spoken language to prepare children for reading. But so it wouldn't make sense, I think, to start too early if the spoken language networks are not very well in place. At the same time, I think another thing which is just wrong is to wait too long and to constantly pass the child to the next class without having taught to read. And I say this because here in Colombia, it's a cycle of the first 3 years for which you need to learn to read. The danger with that is that the teacher from the first year says, oh, I have 10 children in my class that cannot read. Well, they will learn it in the second year, and they will learn it in the third year. And nobody actually cares. And I think it should be the right ways to say, the first grade, you learn to read. This is the year, you know, and everybody should learn to read. And it's the target, 50 words per minute at the end of the first year. And in Spanish, it's completely achievable by every child. That would be my recommendation. But you are completely right. The preschool has a very important role to play. This will be the theme of Ghislaine's presentation. The preschool is preparing by spoken language.
Professor, I would like to know if the child, let's say when he's 10 years old and he has not learned to read, if his possibilities of reading in a way are long-term affected. If his potential is reduced through time, and if you could maybe, you know, if we could have a graph that maybe there's a peak at the time when we can learn most, and then it goes down.
Yes.
In Spanish, there's a saying that old parrots don't learn.
Yeah.
And,
well, it's actually true. It's not that you cannot learn at all, but the plasticity of the brain is being reduced through time. That's definitely true. We don't know exactly at what age it begins to close. There's a lot of evidence for spoken language that it's around puberty that you begin to lose severely. For instance, for second language acquisition, you can see that I have an accent in English. That's because I learned English a little bit too late, and we need to use immersion. So we need an immersion in reading before that critical moment. After that, you can still learn, but you're not learning as efficiently, clearly. And when we scan these people who are ex-illiterate, they learned to read, but only as adults. They were not as fluent, of course, and they had more distributed activity. They didn't have this very focused visual word form activity that we see, which, you know, this very specialized region that really requires a child's brain's plasticity.
Monsieur Den, primero agradecerle que nos haya visitado. Realmente para Colombia es muy importante su presencia. O sea, hace mucho tiempo tenemos acceso a su literatura, acceso a sus libros, acceso a su cátedra en el Collège de France, pero aquí las cosas no se están moviendo, digamos, a la velocidad y con la sistematicidad que se requiere. Mi pregunta va en ese sentido. Tenemos los resultados de la investigación. Ustedes están haciendo un ejercicio importante en Francia a partir del Consejo Científico para generalizar y promocionar esto, y han tenido unas resistencias también importantes. Cuéntenos un poquito de ese proceso, de cómo llega esto al profesor rural, cómo llega esto a diferentes sectores, cómo han logrado, digamos, articularlo con el cuerpo de profesores, ese proceso de poner la ciencia en el salón de clase.
Yeah. This is a great question, and it's not an easy one. The Scientific Council is now 6 years old, and you see this recent questionnaire to teachers. Things are very slow to change. I don't know the exact answer to your question, but I think one key factor is teacher training at the beginning, and also continuous teacher training. Just like a doctor, you know, when you're a doctor, you continue to read about new medicine, new discoveries, and you adapt your prescriptions. And some things simply become not authorized at some point because they are just not doing good for the patient. Well, I think it's similar to in education. There is the same sort of relation between medicine and biology than there is between education and cognitive science, basically. And we need to reinforce the link between the two. So you need cognitive science aware teachers in education schools. You need to upgrade the teaching. And maybe you don't need to spend, I think, any time on Vygotsky, sorry to say that, but you need to spend a lot of time on the science of reading. This is just a simple change to the program, you know. It takes courage, of course, for a university to revise the programs, but you could be at the forefront in this university, say, you know, we are teaching the real science. It takes a lot of time. I think we have to be super patient. The politicians have a role to play here because they could say, we have to have standards. We have to have national tests. We have to have standards for textbooks. This is my fight now in France. We are in the middle of it. I would like to be able to come back to Colombia in a few years without this picture of 35 manuals. I would like to be able to come back with certified manuals, just a few of them, that do the right thing. In France now, we have sometimes the same publisher has 2 manuals because they don't care. They want to sell their manuals, and they sell to the one public and they sell to another public. So they have one whole language and one phonics manual. This is just shameless, I think, and it should not be authorized. Just like some medicine is not authorized anymore because it does badly for patients. So it's a slow process which involves both the teacher schools continuous teacher training, plus some key political decisions for which we should be pushing and which are hard to take. And of course, constant dialogue with the teachers. It's not a one-way process. We need to experiment in the schools. These manuals do not come out of nowhere. It's not the scientists telling the teachers, we know how to do it. It's really a process of dialogue which builds this together. I think so. That's why it's also complex and slow, but it's coming. And I'm swear to you, in 20 years, we will have convergence, but hopefully we can make it faster. I'm an optimist. Yeah. Okay, shall we perhaps...
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Morning. Another question, Monsieur
sorry.
Stanislas Dufanier. Okay, my question goes along the same path according to the two first speakers. What is the appropriate age or period that you consider is the here in Colombia to learn to read? Because some researchers says it's up to 5th grade, and others researchers says it's up to 3rd grade. So what do you consider is the adequate age or period to learn to read?
1st grade, definitely. 1st grade to decode the words and make it a national requirement. And then, as you remember, I said that it still takes 2 or 3 years to automatize reading. So don't just say it's finished after 1st grade. But in 1st grade, everybody should be able to decipher new words at a rate of about 50 words per minute.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nuevamente, gracias al doctor Duan por su magnífica intervención. A continuación, escucharemos la conferencia Procesos de adquisición del lenguaje en la infancia, a cargo de la doctora Ghislaine Duan-Lambert. Ella es investigadora del Centro Nacional de la Investigación Científica. Dirige, además, el Laboratorio de Neuroimagen del Desarrollo en NeuroSpin. Utiliza técnicas de imagen cerebral no invasivas para investigar el desarrollo de las funciones cognitivas en niños. Ha recibido varios premios nacionales e internacionales y fue elegida miembro extranjero de la Academia Nacional de Ciencias en 2022. Bienvenida, doctora Ghislaine. Muchas gracias.
It's okay, but can you put mine? No, the first one. This one. No. The second one. The one with not the second. Yeah.
And we have here
The pointer is here. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Buenos dias. I am like Stan, I am very bad in Spanish and about in English, so I don't know how we can communicate. But what I want to show in this talk is that when you receive children at school, they have already learned a lot. And I want to insist about the first 1,000 days. You know, there is many, across the world, many action across the first 1,000 days. And I think it's very good because during this period, many elements are developing, many cognitive functions are starting, and they are very important for the next period. So usually when we look at childhood, at human childhood, we say that development is slow. It's true, because you will become adult only after 2 decades, which is really slow relatively to other species. But in fact, if you look to this curve, you see that the difference between the chimpanzee and the lower curve and the child and the human in general is really happening during the first years. So you have this tremendous brain development, But also, as I said before, you have the development of the main cognitive function in humans, which are language, social cognition, but also metacognition. Look at this little one, he's 2 years old, he's already thinking a lot. And that's we forget when we speak only about school. So what happens during these first 2 years? What happens that make our brain so big? The first thing that you should remember is that, in fact, the cells that make you think, they are at the, maybe I have a pointer, yes. They are around the cortex, so they are at the periphery. But they are fabricated, they are made in the center of the brain during the fetal period. And they have to go from the center of the brain till the periphery. It's what we call neuronal migration. And this neuronal migration takes place during the last trimester of gestation. And the problem is that you have already some babies that are born during that period. So, you know, when they are born at 6 months of gestation, they have this very smooth brain, and all the neurons, not all, but most of the neurons are under the cortical plate. They are just in migration. It means that if you have anoxia or any toxic during this period, you alterate a lot of this network. But at term birth, you see you have a much more gerified brain, but also all the neurons are now in place, and okay, sorry. But what happened is that even before term, so that it's a recording that we did with near-infrared spectroscopy. So we put light on the head of this little preterm at 6 months of gestation. So the brain is like that. And we make him listen to syllables. So you will see what happens in his brain. So here on the top row, you have the response when you are going from ba, 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 ga, ba, ba, ga. So you have change of phoneme from time to time. Here you have a strict repetition of the phoneme, so ba, 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 ba. And here a change of voice. So going from a male to a female voice. And I will show you the record of the brain response. Sorry. So now the sound is starting, and you see the big response here relatively to the control situation. It means that this baby is reacting to a change of phoneme, which is quite remarkable because this phoneme, the difference between ba and ga, is just in 40 milliseconds. It's one of the most difficult contrasts to perceive. It's when you are speaking, for example, on the phone and give your name, you say, be like Bernard, because you want to be sure that the other one is really understanding. It's a contrast which is lost when you are in dyslexic children or when you have a stroke, because it's one of the most difficult. But babies at 6 months, neonates at 6 months, preterm neonates at 6 months of gestation are already able to perceive it, and with a similar network than in adults and at later age. Meaning that even if this system is very immature, because as I said, the neurons are still migrating, you have an early setup of all the network, which would be useful for the child to learn. After term birth, what happens is two very important things, is that you just want to accelerate the brain responses. So all your pathways are in place, but you will increase the number of synapses between two neurons to make better computation of the information. And you will myelinate the tracks between brain areas, but because you should not forget that each brain part is doing a different computation and should transfer the information to another part of the brain. It's not like a computer where everything is at the same place. Here you should go from that part of the brain to that part of the brain, and that takes time. So you need to accelerate the transfer of information between two parts of the brain, and it's what is done through myelination. And all this, what happened after term is just this acceleration that you want to do, because the human brain is big. But all the neural pathways are in place at birth. So how can we test young babies to see their skills? So there is many techniques, but they all rely on two simple stuffs: and curiosity for novelty, because human infants are very curious in general. They want to see what is interesting. And here, just to show you an example of this curiosity, you have a baby, two screens. On one screen, in both screens, there are dots varying in size, position, and density. But on one side, it's always the same quantity, 10 dots, while on the other side, it was alternating between 10 and 20. And just to show you again how kids are very clever. Okay, so he noticed the difference, and now because it's novel, it's more interesting, he's looking to the part of the screen in which the dots are alternating, showing that they are able to discriminate two quantities like 10 and 20. Another response we use is surprise. It's like when you go to a magician spectacle show. So what you are just measuring is the gaze, how long they look at. So usually you have two situations, two conditions, one which is expected, so maybe the train drops, and which is not expected. And if indeed they are surprised, they will look longer. So if they look longer, it means that they were thinking that the train should drop, and so they have an idea of gravity here in that case. But what is the big revolution now is that we have brain imaging. So before we were really relying on these behavioral responses, and sometimes it's difficult to have the child very attentive during a long time. Now you can use this novelty and surprise response, but look directly in the brain response. And you have several techniques, EEG and MEG, in which you record temporally the temporal response, so how fast the brain is reacting to something. And here in the middle, the MRI technique and near infrared spectroscopy, which is measure a little bit the same thing than MRI, but just putting light on the head of the baby, like you see for the preterms. And here you see more the spatial activity. So what part of the brain is reacting to what you are doing. So just to give you an example of how we process. So here we are in Neurospin, in the center in which Stan and I are working. And you see a little one who is coming for an experiment. We put the EEG electrodes, so 128 electrodes on the head. They are very curious, you cannot do that with an animal, but humans, they are very generally curious to what will happen. So, and so he's looking to the screen, and the screen is doing either, like for example, E movement, and he's listening at the same time the sound E, R. And what we wanted to know is whether, so here you have the recording from each of these channels, and what we wanted to know is whether the brain, in that case, was surprised when the articulatory movement was a E, and she heard E or R, or, okay, so when there was a discrepancy between the facial movement and the sound, whether the baby was surprised, the baby's brain directly. And it is the case. So at 2 months, they expect that they know already what type of movement you should do to produce one or the other sound. So now directly to what I want to say to you today, say how do human infants learn? So first, we share with animals, in fact, what we call core knowledge, that is knowledge which the baby has from start about what is an object, how to orient in space, what are numbers, and adjuncts, who is doing something to somewhere. So that you will see it's quite complex skills sometimes, but not so specific to humans. We share them with animals. The second thing that we have to learn is statistical learning of word regularities. Very important, present also in animals and also in ChatGPT, for example. ChatGPT is just using word regularities, text regularity in that time, but It's exactly the same type of learning process. And evidently, it's present in babies. What is important now is that we have also access to symbolic representation. And that may be something which is specific to humans. And what do I mean with symbolic representation is exactly what I am doing now, is that language is a example of symbolic representation. That is, you represent complex sensory or entities with an arbitrary symbol like a word. So if I say cat, it's only an arbitrary label, but you represent many things behind this word. And so you can manipulate these little symbols much more easily than a sensory representation. What is also, I think, very important in humans, and maybe also specific to humans, is a desire to know and understand. And that the fact that it's something that we have learned during these last years is that brain are not, you do not fill brain with information. In fact, you have internal models of what will happen, and you will project hypotheses on the world and see whether this hypothesis is correct or not. And if you have an error, you change your internal model. So you are always active in your learning. So that is also common with animals, but the fact that you want to do it more, it's maybe specific to humans. It's why we are sending rockets to the moon and not the chimpanzee. And the last thing, and which is important for education, and which is important for education not only at school, but also during the first 1,000 days, is that the baby learn mainly with adults, not with the others of his same age. And he knows that the adults will teach him, and the adults normally, we should know that we are teaching the children. So we have an education or pedagogical module, maybe, that we see in humans and that we do not see in other animals. We are the only species who teaches. I will have some examples showing how animals can learn from others, but they imitate. They are not teach how to do it. And it's something that we are doing. And we are doing implicitly, in fact, very early on. Okay, so it's a big program in a few minutes, so I will just give you a few examples of all of these points. For example, a few examples of the early skills, the core knowledge I was speaking about. So for example, look at the top. Do you recognize something in this movement? So I think that you prefer the right one, in which you have the impression of a bird or a hen walking. But babies also, they prefer the right one, and chicken also. In fact, because you recognize biological movement. And in fact, neonates at birth, newborns, but also young chicken just coming out the shell, they prefer and direct to the hen. While on the other side, it's just the same movement, but the dots are put randomly. Another example. Here. So you see 5 bricks, a screen, another 5 bricks. You should be surprised, and babies are surprised. So because if you have already 5 elements, you enter another 5 elements, it should change, and it has not changed. So baby are surprised. So like in the first experiment, the first slide I show you with the 10 and 20 dots, it shows that babies, and we have many other studies showing that baby have a sense already of number and a sense also of addition and subtraction. If you are putting more objects, the quantity should change. So all of that are the basis after that for mathematical learning or for more complex learning, but we see that we have that from very early on, these capacities. Just to give you more brain for this number task, here we have very 3-month-old babies. They have this net on the head, and we presented to them either 4 or 12 sounds, and we recorded while they were asleep, and when they were awake, we presented present to them images with 4 or 12 objects. And so when you record the EEG, you have big difference between these different conditions. First, because when you have, for example, here 12 objects, 12 tones, if you want to keep the same duration with 4, you will have to have the rhythm will be different. And if you keep the same rhythm for 4, it will be much shorter. So number is a complex percept because it is mixed with duration and with rhythm. So if you look just at the ERP between 4 and 12, you will see nothing because there is too many differences due to the sensory features of these sequences. And if you compare auditory response to visual response, it will be very difficult also to find a common ground between these very different ERP. So what we are doing now is no more comparing directly, but is to make decoding. If we enter in a decoder or classifier, so we need artificial intelligence to do that. We say, okay, you have 4 and you have 12. Try to find when in my brain responses I have a difference between 4 and 12 independently of, for example, the duration and the rhythm of my auditory sequence. And indeed, there is a part here in which we can decode number. And this representation is quite stable. So it's 600 milliseconds after the end of the sequence. And you can and you have this stable representation that remain between 400 and 600 milliseconds, very stable representation at the end of the sequence. And it's not the same as the duration representation. Now we can ask the decoder, find the time or the part of my brain signal which differentiate slow or rapid rhythm, and it's earlier. It's a simpler representation. Or find the time of my brain signal in which I can decode short and long sequences. So if I compare this one with this two, for example, with this one, and it's also earlier and later. So, but you see, each time you have the part of number is different from duration and rhythm. So it means, and after that I can go further and show that in fact we can also decode. So we train the decoders on the auditory numbers and say after that, I have the decoder, can you find in my brain signal responding to images when I can decode 4 and 12 images? And you see it, you have the response here. It means that indeed, number is one of the features that a brain spontaneously compute when is exposed to this sequence or images. And you can find that quite, I don't know, interesting or remarkable, but in fact, fishes and birds are doing the same. So numbers seems very complex, but when you are comparing quantity, so I will not do it for 4 versus 5, at that age not. It's really big quantity, so you have 4 versus 8, it works, 4 versus 12, it works. 4 versus 5, I will not be able to do it, because for that, you need exact calculation. But to learn to compute, to learn when you will be 3, 4, 5, to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you will rely on this system which is present early on and that we can see during these first months of life and that we share with other animals. Another example here is you see the little macaque and the little baby, and they are doing the same. So it's imitation. So it's more difficult to obtain from the macaque, but you will see. So now it's starting. Yeah. So imitation is also part of what we, so he's now doing it. Part of the behavior that we share with other animals, but it could be useful for language learning, for production, for example. And again, what I wanted to show is that, in fact, all these cognitive skill rely on the same networks than in adults. So here you see on the ventral part of the brain, in adults, the response to, say, landscape, houses, or anything which is a big space. and faces, blue for the spaces and yellow for the faces. And you see here in 6 months old, exactly the same organization with the blue responses more in the middle relatively to the yellow responses to face. So what I just wanted to show you in these few examples is how these neural pathways are present very early on, and they are doing the same computations that you find in adults. So now how do we modify this pathway to learn something more than in animals? So we learn about word regularities, and just to give you again an example, this 12-month-old is looking to this images, to this movie. You have these 3 elements and this blue and 1 element yellow. You should be surprised because there was much more chance that it would have been blue elements that goes down than a yellow, and babies also are surprised. So it means that they were expecting a result, and based on the regularities or based on the distribution of elements that they see. Another example here, you see the baby is looking to an experimenter. The experimenter is taking balls from a box here, and she has already taken out 3 red balls. She now put a white one, another red. Now the box open, and what do you expect? This one is much more probable than this one. And so it's also what baby found. So they look longer, the box full of white balls, because it's improbable, and not to the red, the box full of reds. Another explanation, replication, because they are 8 months old, so people were quite surprised to find. So they did a replication, and you see it again, that when the balls that you have drawn does not correspond to the distribution of the box, they look longer. But here you see you have the same responses, so they look similar to the 2 boxes. So what happened? In fact, here they see that the experimenter was drawing the balls from his pocket and not from the box, meaning that in that case, they cannot predict anything about the content of the box. So you see how clever they are? They are 8 months old. So what I give you here is 2 examples of what we call statistical learning. And just to show you that it's very efficient, implicit. Here, in that case, there is no explicit teaching. It exists in all cognitive domain. It is the basis of learning in animals and also actually in neural networks. It's what they are doing with ChatGPT, for example, or DALL-E, is just using the regularities either in spoken or in text or in images to learn. And it allows the babies to predict what will happen based on what has already happened. Now we arrive to something which are, as I said, more specific to humans and which are important for us and especially for teaching. We are a symbolic species. We use symbols everywhere. Just on this maybe images that you have seen since start, we know that these people are highly sancto, I don't know, I do not remember the term in English, because they have this crown over the head. We have books which are typical of a symbolic system. We have this blue coat, which is meaning that it's immediately Virgin Mary, because she is always with this blue coat. So, so we have all of that all the time. We have musical notation, we have written language, we have traffic sign, we have uniform. If you go to the airport, you will know immediately who is somebody like you, a traveler, and who is from the airport just because of the uniform, etc., etc. So we are really using sign like that to immediately understand more complex notion. And for what it is useful is because you compress the information under one arbitrary sign. So for example, if I give you an example in which I associate the sign R with a tone. So I say R will be beep and B will be boop. If I do beep, boop, I said you will know immediately it will be A, B, A, B. If I say A, B, B, you will immediately understand that I will do B, B, boop, boop. Okay? So it's very useful because it gives you many information reduced in a small and arbitrary system. And the first symbolic systems that baby acquire is language. And why language is so interesting is that I can directly transfer information from my brain to your brain. For the moment, I have knowledge that I want to transfer to you, and I use language to do it. And you will immediately know my ideas because I translate them in language and put them in your brain. And you will do something else with what I said and transfer to somebody else. So it's a terrific system. It's a marvelous system. And it's very useful for babies to learn about the world. So look at these images that were presented by Sandy Waxman in 3-month-old babies. Okay, so you have seen a series of images, and now I present to you this green dinosaur and this green fish. If I say nothing, babies are not so much interested, and they look equally to the dinosaur, the green dinosaur or the green fish. But, and it's why it's published in PNAS by Waxman, is that, in fact, each time the baby saw the images, they say, look at the toma. It is a toma. Oh, again a toma. Oh, toma. And now, look at the results. They look longer to the fish. So it's an orange box here, to the fish than to the dinosaur. So what happened? So, and after that, they make controls. Here you have backward speech. Here you have tones. And it's not because just you have sound with images, because when the sound is not a real sentence, but tones or backward speech, there is no effect. They look similarly to the two images. So what happens is that, in fact, all these images, you have a body and you have like legs and things coming outside this body. You have body parts which are clearly individualized. So if I say, look at the toma, in fact, despite the fact that they are all different, I give the same, so it's not a word for them at that time. It's a sound form which is always at the same time. And babies know that we communicate with speech, and speech convey information. So each time I present this body with body parts, I say toma. So I push the baby to try to find what is a similar feature between all these images. And when you arrive here, you see that the fish, this form, this animal has no body parts. So it's different. So in fact, naming the category makes them easier to detect to infant. So you see the importance of language. It's not only to communicate between us. If I say, okay, look, they are all dinosaurs, if I take the correct word, you will see, yes, there is a common features. And now that I have this new one, I know that this new one belongs to the same category. So when you name things for babies, you help them to find what is interesting in the world and to create categories that correspond to this name. So we did it also with EEG. So now we have this, we present to babies this either this birds or this mechanical object. And which one was this? The first one was called, say, pauvant, and the second one, cafou. And they were looking so to the center of the screen. They got pauvant, and after that, cafou, and it was the mechanical object. And they heard the other one, and they got the birds. And we trained them with only a few trials, 36 trials. And after that, in the test part, from time to time, 25% of the time, we make an error. So we present not the expected image. And when you get, so it's 3 months old, it confirmed perfectly Waxman experiment. Baby was surprised. So when the word which was presented here, say, for example, pauvant, they were expecting the bird, they get this. You have this, you have the start the response, and the response after that totally goes down because it's not the correct image. So we confirm perfectly a Waxman experiment. We found it's a very early effect during the sensory part of the ERP, and it confirms that 3-month-old can learn labels for categories in a few trials. And why the infants are able to do that? I mean, it's very easy for infants to do it, even at 3 months. While animals, it takes time and trials, and it's very long, and at the end, we do not have such an efficiency. It's because we have the same network. The network I show you in preterm babies, we saw it, and Stan showed already the image in babies, and it's the same than in adults. It's because we have this activity, this network that we can learn. And often, and notably in the frontal areas. But I will go, I am too long, just to give you also MRI experiment in which we show that we have this frontal activity, despite the fact that we know that the frontal cortex is the most immature cortex of the brain, but it does not mean that because it is immature, it's not functional. That's a common error to say, okay, the brain is, it will change a lot, so it's not working. That's a little bit bizarre. No, it takes a lot of calories to work, so it should work. Otherwise, it's a loss of energy. So this part of the brain are working, and they are doing the same stuff than in adults. The only difference is that they are slow, much slower. So for example, if you are surprised, if I present you something like in all these experiments in adults, I will have the surprise response in 300 milliseconds, while in babies, it will take 1 second. So if you speak too fast to the baby, for example, it will not follow. It's too fast. So you should slow down yourself, and you will have similar response at that age that you will have later on. And it's true that it will accelerate during childhood, and so it's why also we speak generally slower to children than we do to adults. Okay, I will just finish. Just to show you how infants rely on adults to learn, and why it is important for us to adapt to the child. So we spoke already of imitation. We know that we can imitate, that animals imitate, that children also imitate, like this little one with his father. But what happens here? So for example, on the left, you see that the chimp, this little one is looking how her mother is breaking a nut with a stone. And we know that there are cultures, chimpanzee cultures, in which they have learned to do that. So just by imitation, not all chimpanzees are doing it. It's really local inventions. But we know that when somebody in the group is doing it, the youngest will imitate and do it. But the big difference is this situation. Here you see the mother is doing something, the little one is looking like here, they are not looking at each other. While what we are doing when we are teaching is that we are looking to each other. When I am presenting this talk and I want to convince you, I am not doing like that and speaking and speaking and speaking. I try to look to each of you. It's quite difficult because you are numerous, but it's one part of the thing is that we try to have eye contact. We try to have this mimic. We try to have this intonation to convey a message. And it's part of what our Hungarian colleague Gergely calls the pedagogical module. The fact that we know that we are teaching, in that case, I am not say teaching, but conveying something, but when you are in a classroom, you are teaching, or when you are a parent, you teach. And that you know that I try to convince or to give you some information because I am doing all these markers of exchange. And it's crucial. It's crucial for our pedagogy in the human and social group. And so, for example, even in imitation, children analyze the relevance of the action, and usually they expect rational behavior from the adults. So this was an interesting story because it was in the 70s. There was this experiment in which they were showing that if babies are coming to the lab and see this bizarre action of a woman bumping her head on a box to light on a lamp, when babies are coming 1 week later, they are doing the same. And so the conclusion at that time in the 70s was, okay, human infants imitated, and they are quite stupid because they could have used their hand to do the same, and they were using their head, which was just blind imitation, if I can say that. But Gergely said, no. They are not stupid. They are clever. They are very clever. Because if you see somebody bumping a head on a box to light it on while the hands are free, it means that you cannot use your hands, because a rational behavior will be to use the hand to bump, to light on the light. So he did the experiment again, and had 2 groups of babies. The first one, like in the first experiment, so the hands were free and the woman bump with her head. And the other condition, what she called buzzy hands, was that the woman say, oh, it's cold here, I need to take my shawl. So now the hands are occupied to keep the blanket over the shoulders, and she bump. So what will do the babies in the 2 experiments? So in the first experiment, you replicate what have been done in the 70s. So when the hands are free, most of the baby press with the head. But when the hands are occupied, they use the hand. And the conclusion is that if your hands are occupied, you use the head because your hands are occupied. But you, baby, you just can use your hand. You are not your hand occupied. So it's just the same. It's a rational behavior. But if I am looking to you, you have your hand free, you use your head. It means that this lamp, for some reason I do not know, but I am just a little baby, so there are many things that I do not know. I will use my head like she's doing. And most of our cultural habits are something like that. We do it because we see our father and grandfather and grandparents doing the same, and we do the same. We do not know why, but we go on. So it's the same ideas. They should have been rational at some point. At least we think that. Okay, another situation in which it's difficult for a baby to understand what they should learn. So here you see, again, it's the same team, the Hungarian guys, they are very clever. You see, you are a young baby, you arrive in the lab, and you see a woman that has 2 objects in front of her, object A and B, and she looks to object A and say, big smile, object B, bleh. And after that, she asks the baby, give me an object. The babies are not stupid. They see that she prefers object A, so they give object A. Now, second situation, you see the same until here, but now she left, and you have another experimenter coming on. And now you have to decide, is object A good for everybody and B bad? Or was it just a preference of this woman? Okay, and that's something which happens all the time. That is, if I saw you doing something, does it mean that it's episodic, an event? Or is it something that I should learn because it's always bad? It's poison. I should never touch this thing because I will be hurt by And what you are doing to say to the baby, it's a general knowledge, it's something that you should learn, and it's not an episodic event, is that you are looking to the baby before doing the action. Versus here, she is not looking to the baby. And you see the difference? When she was looking to the baby before to do the action, so the baby deduces that if I am looking to you before doing something, is that I want you to learn that it's global general knowledge. While if I am doing business in my own business without taking any time to make an eye contact, in fact, it's an episode, and I do not generalize. And so they give object A and B almost the same time. While here there is a clear preference to give to the second experimenter the object that the first likes. So it just, in fact, to confirm what I said at the beginning. So when I want to teach, I do three things. I make eye contacts, I have intonated speech, and contingency of action. Usually, if you are doing something, I react, and you react to my reaction, and so on and so on. And that's what they call the pedagogical modules that we have in humans, that help us to transfer the information from the adults to the young, and the young knows that he is in a pedagogical moment. That if you are looking to him and give him some information with all these elements, it means that he should learn. And just to give you, I don't know what is the time and whether I still have time. Okay, so it's okay. So, and I just want to give you an example of how it is important, for example, for verbal acquisition and word acquisition. So the first word are understood around 6 months. So at 6 months, usually children knows mom, dad, their own name, and maybe hug, eat, the frequent words around them. At the end of the first year, they understand around 50 words. So it's quite, and after that, suddenly, after the lexical explosion, so after 2 years of age, suddenly you see this big increase, and you have, they acquire 10 words a day, and you have this sharp curve of acquisition. So comprehension is ahead from production, so but they understand much more than they produce, but they learn 10 words a day, and to arrive at 6 years at 14,000 words, not 300, 40,000, because usually I read in papers that children are only understanding 300 words. No, 14,000. I mean, if you consider all word shape like hugs or hugged, you know, all this form, but it's still so it means that you are starting from zero. So that means it's a lot. So you should not be, how would you say, timid when you teach the children. They have to learn. Their brain is built to learn. It's our learning organ. Okay, so now you are in a family, and either it's a family in which you speak to the children, or there are still many words around you, but mainly, for example, by the television and so on. And so in this experiment here, Fernald put a microphone on the baby's neck to record what was around. And you see that, for example, this baby here heard a lot of speech relatively to all this one, but not so much of child-directed speech, okay? So what is important? To have speech around you or to have speech addressed to you? And it's what they show, and there is many other experiments, I just choose one, is that in fact, the vocabulary size depends of number of words addressed to the child, not number of words they heard around them, but addressed to them. And not only the size of the vocabulary, but the efficiency. So how do you measure efficiency in young babies? Here you have a theater in which you have 2 images, and what you are measuring is how fast the baby will orient to the correct images when you say, where is the doggy? So you have doggy which is arriving here, and you look, and you see that some babies orient faster. So it's what you see relatively to others, and the baby who orient faster are the one to whom adults spoke. And it is important because it will give you a gap already between the children who get a lot of speech around them, speech addressed to them, and those who are not. And we are very bad, and it's true in all countries and in all schools, there is no better system, that the gap that you have at the entrance of school between those who have a good vocabulary and those who have a low vocabulary remains during all the school. So we are bad in schools to recover of this gap. So we should intervene earlier, or we should find better way for the school to compensate if there is a gap between the different children. And just to show you that it's not only an effect on vocabulary size, vocabulary efficiency, but we see effect also on the brain. Here you have you see again the response in adults and in babies when they are listening to speech, and here the difference in this network between the children who had a lot of dialogues during their infanthood and those who are less. And you see these frontal areas are much less activated in those who have less spoken child-directed language. And so we should encourage parents to talk, and especially and also to read, because sometimes parents say, okay, but I don't know to talk about what with children. They do not answer to me, and give them books. And if they do not know, if they do not like to read, which could happen in parents, pictures are enough. And you can speak about what is happening here and here. You point to the images, you give a vocabulary. And why it is important, because usually when you read a book with a child, you speak about things that you do not speak in the daily life. You speak about things which are outside the events of the child. You employ richer vocabulary. You employ better syntax. You make more complex sentences. And that expand the exposure of the child to a more rich, diverse spoken language. Furthermore, if you read the books, you will not say shut up and other very nice things that sometimes some parents say to children. So you will encourage, you will be more positive, and so on and so on. And you will stop a little bit for parents which are very busy. They should take some time with their child. Around the book, it's easier than around, or cooking, if you, some parents would prefer, but any activity in which you will have this dialogue between the child and the adult. Just a very rapid and final slide about what is important also is to sleep. And in some families, sleep is really missing. Till 6 years of age, a child needs 12 hours of sleep a day. That is half of the day. So it could be during all the night or with naps. And naps are important. So again, here, the babies, so it's 6 to 8 months old, they have to learn this bizarre object and to associate this bizarre object with non-words. And after that, so you train them, and after it was a more complex experiment than the one I showed before. So at the end of learning, they do not learn quite so much. But after a nap, look at the difference between the two images here. And the effect size of between congruent and incongruent pairs, so between the correct association and incorrect association, was proportional to the children's slow wave sleep duration during nap. So, and we have the same thing in children, that if they nap, you will have a better abstraction and better memory of what will happen. Especially if you learn new words, you will go better in the lexicon if you nap. So it could be a good idea for young children to nap at school. I don't know how it is here. We have to insist in France because they say, no, when children are sleeping, they lose their time. We should no, you do not lose your time when you sleep. It's important. It's part of the learning algorithm of a human brain, or of any brain, in fact, even a mice brain. You should nap too, because you have some replay and some better encoding if you nap. So I will just finish and give you so you can forget all the others. But now you should be attentive and remember this message. So first, the brain functional architecture, which is complex, is present from the last trimester of gestation. So all the neurons are in place, the neuronal pathways are set up, and they are organized around core knowledge that allows the young children to make this first hypothesis about the world. Okay, baby is not a blank state. He's starting from some knowledge which are provided by this network. So for example, that people around him should be recognized. They are part of his parenthood. Refined statistical analysis of events allows the adjustment of these internal models, especially when you predict an error. So in that case, you have a big remodeling of the model. So error is normal. We learn by errors. So do not punish too much the error, or not at all. Take advantage of them to explain. The adults are important. We cannot expect that children learn only by because they are with other children. I mean, that's not enough. We have knowledge, and we should transmit the knowledge. We know everything we know now because they have been taught to us. We have not to discover again and again how the world is working at each generation. We benefit from the others. We are a social species. We are learning from the others, and we are learning from our parents. And why the adults is better? Because we, as adults, we know attention. Where is attention? We benefit from that. We know when the child is looking to us, and here is ready for me to give information. We are patient. Imagine two children, they are playing, they are doing their stuff. If it's okay, if the other one is doing at the same speed, but if not, I am going on. But normally adults are more sensitive to attention cues given by the child, so they can adapt. And they provide the child with the relevant concept via symbolic system. Language is one, mathematical notation and is another one. And in school, we have a lot of this symbolic system to transmit. And then the child, so it's not that we adapt to the child, but the child knows, because of all these nonverbal cues that we give to him, knows that we are teaching to him. So it's not this stupid imitation, not stupid, but a little bit, that we see in animals. There is really this dialogue between the adults and the child. And it's that we should foster at school, because it's something that have been used during the first 3, 4, 6 years before, and the child is very, normally in a good family, is very familiar to that, and we should keep that. We should keep this curiosity. We should keep this trust in the adult. So in some families, there is no more trust with the adult. So we should, for teachers, they should try to re-put it, and it's one of the difficulty. But normally, in an ideal situation, really the child is trustful and expect a rational behavior from the adult and build on that for its own learning. Okay, I think it's all for today. And sleep is part of the learning and memory. So I expect you sleep tonight very well to remember all of that. And thank you very much. Yeah? No, it's okay. Thank you.
Gracias a la doctora Ghislaine por su intervención. A continuación abriremos un espacio para unas 3 preguntas de parte del público. Aquí tenemos una primera. Invitamos a las personas que están sentadas, se pueden ubicar en las sillas, aquí por lo menos al centro hay unas 3, 4 asientos. Adelante.
Hola, buen día, muchas gracias. Realmente es una información muy valiosa. Gracias por estar aquí y compartir con nosotros. La pregunta que tengo es acerca de cómo ya ha quedado claro que el papel del adulto es fundamental para enseñar, pues, digamos, esa que sea explícito y sea de parte del adulto, pero cómo la tecnología juega un papel de pronto en el aprendizaje de los bebés que puede afectar. Me gustaría saber si de pronto ustedes encontraron algo, si de pronto ya se está trasladando el papel del adulto al uso de la tablet, del celular, sobre todo en los primeros años, y acerca del lenguaje y de las emociones.
Yeah, that's a bad idea. No, especially because for many families, screen is a child keeper. So you lose the dialogue because the problem is not is essentially in the contingency of the action. So there is some experiment in which children are exposed, for example, to foreign contrast, phonetic contrast, and to keep, for example, I go back. When you are a child, you lose the phonetic contrasts which are not used in your language at the end of the first year. For example, the EE that you do not have in Spanish. Spanish babies can learn it because if they are in France, they will keep it. But at the end of the first year, they will lose it. And people say, okay, we just need to expose these children to EE and they will keep it. It's not enough. And even videos are not enough. It's not just audio, it's videos. Because you need this exchange, this dialogue, and that all this technique, all these devices are not usable for that. We had television before, and we know that babies have not learned through television. So we have two problems. The first one is that parents give tablets thinking that the children will learn, and we have evidence that they do not learn through a tablet. And the second and important problem is that the parents prefer to be on their tablet than to be with a child, which is in fact the main problem because their tablet, we should remember that all these programs on tablets and phones are really done to keep our attention. The goal of Twitter or X now or Facebook is to have us. And they are very interesting. They are planned to keep us. And if you have a child at start is not so interesting. I mean, it's difficult to exchange, you have to adapt and so on. Maternal love is not as innate as we can think. So you have to have this exchange with this new human being. And in fact, because of this exchange, you find, oh, yes, it is interesting. Oh, yes, I like him. Oh, yes, it's my child. And so if the mother or the father are only on their phones, they will not make this bond and they will not have this dialogue and reach. So that's very bad. And I think the worst is really for the parents because they spend too much time on their screen and not enough with their kids. And so the problem of this device is because the kids is not exposed to dialogue, is not bonding with his parents and so on and so on. And there is some other evidence also showing that, for example, if you are in this dialogue with a child and suddenly your phone ring, you stop the dialogue and you take your phone. In that case, there is an interruption and the baby is not learning. So it's a very nice experiment by Katy Hirschpasek. She has worked a lot on this device. And she shows that the interruption because you stop and you go to the phone is deleterious to the child learn. You see, it's very different from what is happening in big family where somebody say, okay, come on, we need you, but you will finish your connection with the child before to answer to the other person calling you. But with a phone, you have this, you have the strong, how would you say, impulsion to answer immediately. So to turn immediately to this alarm string because it's an alarm. So, and all this, smooth transitions that we had before all this technique are disappearing. And I think it's very bad.
Bonjour, Madame Lambert. C'est un plaisir d'être avec vous et de vous écouter. Oui. Donc, ma question, c'est plutôt sur les recommandations que vous avez pour les autorités administratives qui s'occupent de l'éducation. Qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire pour améliorer ce genre de process?
I don't know if here you have maternal books that you give at the maternity. In France, we have that. So when the baby is born, I will take some water. Sorry. Thank you very much. When the baby is born, we gave to every family a little book of what to do for, for the milk, so on, and some recommendation also for cognitive development. So I don't know if you have that, but that's because all neonates, you have at least this moment in which you have contact between caregivers, I mean, administrative or medical or whatever, and the child and the family. You can take advantage of this moment to give some elements, not only of physical development, but cognitive development. Otherwise, I don't know exactly the situation in Colombia, but we try to have a website now in which parents can go to find information which are at least validated, because if you go to the web, you see many sites with many recommendations, and they are not at all licit. So we try to have a, say, national website, medical website, in which parents can go and they are sure at least that the information is validated. Otherwise, I think it's to teach again, not only teachers, but also medical students when they will be the doctors or nurses and so on, also on cognitive development. I think that cognitive development should be one of the main topic of all caregivers, of all people who will work with children, even judges, or all these lawyers and so on, because we know so much more about the need of this little one, and they are always forgot, because we think to the parents, even in laws and so on, and we do not think to what happens to this little one. So, and again, like for teachers, I think we need to teach the new generation about all this knowledge, for them to take care of the young children, because they are our future. So if we do not foster them correctly, they will be already very bad about the ecological that we live. So I hope at least that we could be able to make them happier.
Thank you. I have one more question. Our maternal language is Spanish. However, there is a huge interest to promote bilingual education, especially English, in the early years. So my question is, what do you think about it, and which is the best age to start bilingual education when our context is not really exposed to English? I mean, many families are not exposed to English. However, the context consider its importance. So what do you think about it?
To learn a language is always better to learn early. But we have the same problem in France. We are learning English very late. And so you have this, so you have two effects. From start, you have a decrease. So it's something quite linear, that the earlier you are exposed, the better you are to learn a correct phonology, so the accent and so on, the syntax and so on. Not so much the lexicon. And you have puberty, which is also another big drop. So the earlier, the better. But I am thinking also in bilingualism, I suppose here you have also many other languages than Spanish. So, or I don't know many, but some. And that children may arrive at school with two languages from their native background or whatever. And I think that bilingualism is always a good thing. So we should not have, we should encourage parents to use the language in which they feel better. So if they feel better to use one language than another one, and not to force them to use the correct language, because what is the best for children is not so much to be exposed to correct languages, than to be exposed to language in general. So the more language the more language base they are, the better the system develops. So and one unfortunate and sad story to show that demonstrate that is deaf children, because at some point, and in some countries it's still like that, so they were saying, okay, we should not expose to sign language these children because they should learn spoken language, and so they arrive late in a spoken and in fact they never developed correct spoken languages because they had no languages, even when they were implanted and so on, just because during the first years they were not exposed to any language. So it's better. It's really important to push parents to speak and in the language they like. And after that, at school, you can learn a second language. So earlier the best. If it's if you can have English teacher very early on, you should teach English very early. But if you don't have teachers, how can you do? So now you have also the web to use. So maybe we should also think to better way of teaching through the web. For the moment we discuss about the devices, so it's quite difficult to see the best way of using the web, or so maybe you can have exchange with other countries, so you speak in Spanish, they speak in English, and so on and so on, to have this contingent reaction. But the earlier the best for any languages. And you can have 2, 3, 5. It's not a problem for the child brain, not the adult. Is complicated, but the child is a linguistic brain.
Doctora Lamberts, saludos cordiales. David Espinel, educador. Mi pregunta va en relación a la anterior cuestión. En mi profesión he tenido estudiantes que vienen de familias que hablan 2 idiomas y muchas veces son, por ejemplo, no es el inglés, son idiomas distintos, cirílicos o árabes. Entonces, la pregunta como educador sería, ¿cuál es la decisión importante para poder enseñar en las primeras etapas del crecimiento? Si bien, por ejemplo, como profesor de español desde la primera infancia, eso resulta un dilema, un paradigma. Se dice, usted lo acabó de responder, que hay que decidir. Y la pregunta es esa, ¿cómo actuar como educador en frente a los padres con esta problemática que pueda afectar también el crecimiento y también el tema del lenguaje en el niño y la niña?
So I did a bit answer already to that question. So the parents should speak their language. You should speak Spanish. And in fact, in many families or many environmental, which is not directly the own family, in fact, the children know really well who is speaking what language and do not mix. But it should be immersed. If you want that they learn Spanish, they should be immersed in Spanish. But they can be immersed in 2 languages at the same time, is what I want to say. They can be speak one language at home and another language, for example, at school, or in, I don't know what you organize as an educator in their occupation. So you should speak Spanish, you speak a lot of Spanish, maybe more to them than to the children coming from monolingual family. And maybe at start they will not answer. It's not really, but they will understand. As you have seen, the understanding is much more complex first than the production. So even if you have the impression that they do not produce, they will understand and they will build the Spanish repertoire of phonemes, the Spanish syntax, and so on. And you should not, because in France at some point they were saying to the parents from foreign families, do not speak your own language. No. The parents should go on, speak their language, and you should speak and immerse as much as possible in Spanish and as soon as you can. And so there is some interesting aspect of to be bilingual, is that sometimes they know some vocabulary in one language and other vocabulary in another language. For example, they may know cooking and fruits and vegetables in their native language and mathematical term in Spanish, for example. So if you want to have both, you should also speak about trivial things in Spanish for them to have the vocabulary. You know, when you are coming from an academic background, you do not know the insult in the you know, the bad words in another language because you never learned that at school, but it's very useful in a country when you live in that country. So, you know, you have this discrepancy between the type of vocabulary you have when you have what you learn at school and what you learn at home, but as soon as you can.
Ya, yo creo que con esta pregunta cerramos para darle continuidad a nuestra agenda. Para finalizar esta jornada de la mañana, daremos, antes que nada, por supuesto, doctora Ghislaine, gracias por su intervención. Y para continuar con nuestra agenda, daremos paso al lanzamiento del plan de lectura del Departamento del Atlántico a cargo de la Secretaria de Educación, María Catalina Ucros, Secretaria de Educación Departamental y su equipo de expertos. En este momento se va a dar paso al lanzamiento del plan de lectura del Departamento del Atlántico. María Catalina Ucros es abogada, egresada de la Universidad del Norte, especialista en Derecho Económico de Louvain, en Bélgica, con una maestría en Ciencias Políticas de la Universidad Jean Moulin de Lyon, Francia. Además, es candidata a doctor en Educación por Nova Southeastern University. Se ha desempeñado como jefa de la Oficina de Participación Ciudadana del Distrito de Barranquilla en el periodo 2012-2015. Y en el sector privado ha sido abogada de importantes firmas nacionales e internacionales. Agradecemos a todas y todos que han permanecido en el auditorio para poder también presenciar este lanzamiento del plan de lectura del Departamento del Atlántico a cargo de la Secretaría de Educación. Adelante, bienvenidos. ¿Quieres dar como esas palabras? Sí.
¿Me ayudas a...?
Claro que sí. Su presentación la compartieron.
Uh-huh.
Voy a descargarlo. Voy a... Dale. Creo que su equipo me la mandó. Yo la mandé aquí a WhatsApp. ¿Quién fue la que me la mandó? ¿Quién la tenía en la presentación? ¿Quién tenía su presentación? No. Eso, no. ¿Quién tiene la presentación?
Sí, debe ser esta, ¿no?
Es esta. Es esta.
Sí.
Ok. Uh-huh. Entonces, el apuntador.
Es.
Uh-huh. Voy a cerrar aquí. Sí. Aquí está la presentación. Listo.
Gracias. Ok, perfecto.
Una botellita de agua aquí, ¿oye?
Acá, gracias.
Disculpa que
Bueno, muy buenos días tengan todos. Primero que todo, agradecer a la Universidad del Norte por este espacio. Desde la Secretaría de Educación del Departamento del Atlántico, yo pienso que el Departamento del Atlántico como tal, incluyendo los 20 municipios no certificados y el distrito de Barranquilla, han hecho un gran esfuerzo por promover la lectura en el departamento. De veras que para nosotros como departamento fue un reto, desde el plan de desarrollo de nuestra gobernadora Elsa Noguera, dejar plasmado un plan departamental de lectura, escritura y bibliotecas escolares. Para contextualizarlo, lo llamamos mensaje de mar y río en un Atlántico colorido. Pero este plan departamental como tal tenía un objetivo preciso. El objetivo era fortalecer las competencias comunicativas en los niños, niñas, jóvenes y adolescentes del Departamento del Atlántico. Es por eso que la estrategia promueve el desarrollo de las habilidades en lectura, escritura y oralidad. Pero esto era imposible hacerlo sin un trabajo en equipo. Y adicionalmente, como sociedad, nos enfrentamos en el año 2022 en el mayor reto que ha tenido la humanidad y que ha tenido la educación en todo el mundo, que fue una pandemia. En ese momento era cómo sacar adelante un plan de lectura en medio de una crisis como la que teníamos en la educación en la pandemia. Para esto, como departamento, elaboramos una estrategia llamada PENCORA, en donde fortalecíamos todo lo relacionado con pensamiento, comunicación y razonamiento. En el caso de la lectura, la estrategia se llamaba Comunicando Ando, y aquí fue una estrategia con una inteligencia colaborativa. ¿Por qué? Porque llamamos a la puerta de cada uno de nuestros docentes, que eran los principales preocupados en qué hacemos. Ahí comenzamos a trabajar en equipo qué modalidades íbamos a llevar para justamente poder tener un plan de lectura y poder promover la lectura en el Departamento del Atlántico. Como secretaría, elaboramos una estrategia, se llamó Escuela en Casa. Esta estrategia Escuela en Casa contó con todos nuestros profes para poder llevar contenidos, para poder justamente dinamizar este aprendizaje. Se nos sumó Plaza Sésamo Internacional, fuimos nombrados los aliados confiables de Plaza Sésamo en América Latina, pero adicionalmente a eso llevamos también una estrategia de radio. Hicimos alianza con 19 emisoras comunitarias en todo el Departamento del Atlántico, y ahí pudimos promover en casa, en diferentes ambientes, todo lo relacionado con la lectura. Es importante destacar que en esta estrategia de Escuela en Casa tuvimos 17 programas dedicados justamente a este tema y articulados con las respectivas adecuaciones curriculares. Tuvimos 150 programas de Pencora Kit, 130 de exploradores, 30 radionovelas. Hicimos también una alianza con Círculo Abierto. Con Círculo Abierto desarrollamos el acceso a la biblioteca digital Maquemaque, creamos 5 clubes de lectura, hicimos seguimiento asincrónico a más de 700 docentes, pero también es importante, y esto lo vamos a ver en el panel que viene ahorita, que nosotros construimos sobre lo construido. ¿En qué sentido? En el Departamento del Atlántico no podemos perder de vista que tenemos 86 sedes rurales. En estas 86 sedes rurales tenemos 29,000 estudiantes que están en la ruralidad, y que para llegar a ellos hay que tener diferentes estrategias. Es por eso que hoy también les vamos a compartir con cada uno de nuestros profesores, con cada uno de nuestros directivos docentes, qué realidad en cada establecimiento educativo se fue adaptando para poder responder a esas necesidades de promoción de lectura en cada uno de los establecimientos educativos. Porque no podemos llegar como Estado con una tabla rasa y aplicar a todos por igual. Cada establecimiento educativo tiene una singularidad, y yo pienso que el éxito del programa ha sido respetar la singularidad de cada territorio y de cada estrategia de docentes. Nuestros docentes tienen un potencial enorme, y como secretaría el trabajo de nosotros, el deber de nosotros es potencializar en cada territorio la dinámica de cada profesor. Es importante destacar que por un profesor pasan 3 generaciones, mientras que un estudiante esté en el sistema, sale, y nosotros como administración igual. Entonces, ¿cuál tiene que ser nuestra línea? Generar políticas públicas y construir sobre lo construido. Entonces, como les decía, nosotros pues con la estrategia Leer el Mundo tuvimos un acercamiento a 19 emisoras comunitarias, hicimos estas alianzas, pero lo más importante de todo esto es que todo fue documentado y logramos en el año 2022 ser reconocidos con el certificado de calidad por parte del convenio entre el Ministerio de Educación y la UNESCO, dándonos la certificación CERLAC. Esta certificación, ¿qué significa? Significa algo que nosotros valoramos muchísimo, que tenemos un equipo de calidad que ha justamente hecho la tarea, pero además tenemos directivos docentes, tenemos profesores que se le han medido esta estrategia y que se ha articulado y se ha dejado también documentado en el distrito que independientemente el secretario que esté, los funcionarios que cambien, vamos a poder continuar con esta promoción de la lectura en el departamento del Atlántico. Es así como cedo la palabra en estos momentos a Claudia para que ella les explique cómo son estas líneas. Son 4 líneas, son supremamente interesantes y lo más importante de ellas es que han sido construidas desde el trabajo en equipo con nuestros profes, estudiantes y cada uno de nuestros asesores en calidad. Muchísimas gracias, los dejo con Claudia.
Bueno, muchas gracias, doctora Catalina. Un cordial saludo para todos. Es un placer para mí el día de hoy presentarles las 4 líneas estratégicas del Plan Departamental de Lectura, Escritura, Oralidad y Bibliotecas Escolares. Estas acciones han iniciado y seguirán en marcha hasta el año 2027. La primera línea es Leo en todo lugar. Busca ofrecer a los establecimientos educativos oficiales del Departamento del Atlántico estrategias que promuevan espacios interactivos y que fortalezcan ambientes pedagógicos, que fortalezcan el desarrollo de las competencias comunicativas en los niños del territorio. Estas acciones planteadas tienen como fin que los niños y las niñas generen mayor interés por la lectura, la escritura y la oralidad. Desarrollen sus gustos y sus preferencias, la imaginación y la creatividad. Que exploren un mundo a través de las letras y adquieran aprendizajes significativos para la vida. A propósito de esto, Jorge Luis Borges expresa que hay quienes no pueden imaginar un mundo sin pájaros. Hay quienes no pueden imaginar un mundo sin agua. En lo que a mí se refiere, soy incapaz de imaginar un mundo sin libros. Invito a la docente Silvia Fontalvo de la Institución Educativa Turística de Simón Bolívar, quien nos cuente su experiencia en su institución educativa en esta línea.
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Silvia Fontalvo, vengo de la Institución Educativa Técnica Turística Simón Bolívar del municipio de Puerto Colombia, presentando el proyecto Mi Puerto de Saberes en Mar de Tradiciones. Este es un proyecto que se está desarrollando desde el año 2020 en la institución, nació en pandemia y precisamente el nombre busca invitar a las personas a conocer este maravilloso municipio, así como lo hacemos con los estudiantes, pero es una metáfora que responde a que el estudiante es el puerto que aprende de todo aquello que viene de afuera, pero también que produce de todas esas tradiciones que él conoce del municipio y precisamente del mar que se encuentra rodeado del municipio de Puerto Colombia, lleno de historias, de maravillosas tradiciones y costumbres que están en el municipio de Puerto Colombia. Precisamente haciendo un poco de historia, esta fue la función del muelle de Puerto Colombia, que en su momento fue el segundo más largo del mundo. Entonces, nuestro nombre hace alusión a esta metáfora. También tenemos un personaje que nos acompaña en todas las actividades, es Simón. Aquí está una cojinúa que habita en las playas de Puerto Colombia, también buscando que los estudiantes conozcan toda esta tradición gastronómica que tiene y la fauna que tiene nuestro municipio. Este proyecto nace de la necesidad de que los estudiantes fortalecieran sus competencias comunicativas orales y escritas, pero no solamente trabajarlo inicialmente lo trabajamos desde el área de lenguaje, pero también buscábamos articularlo con el área de turismo, que es el énfasis de la institución. Entonces, desde el preescolar y la básica primaria, queríamos resaltar todos estos conocimientos, estas nociones en el área de turismo y precisamente que conocieran ese acervo cultural del municipio. Luego lo realizamos o hicimos un pilotaje con las diferentes áreas y eso es lo que se ha venido realizando en estos años del 2021, 2022 y en este año articulado a las diferentes áreas. En nuestro proyecto leemos historias. De hecho, hemos titulado una actividad que se llama Mi Puerto cuenta una historia, donde los estudiantes conocen cuentos, leyendas, mitos del municipio, de autores propios del municipio de Puerto Colombia y toda esa tradición oral que enmarca el municipio de Puerto Colombia. También han escrito poemas. Tenemos un poemario, eso es un producto de nuestros estudiantes, donde se unieron las familias también a hacer esta producción. Recetas que han escrito los estudiantes y esta actividad ha permitido también que las familias se integren, porque no solamente ellos escribían sus recetas, sino que también la cocinaban en casa y nos mostraban cómo lo realizaban con sus familiares o cómo indagaban cuáles eran las recetas propias del municipio de Puerto Colombia. Crearon y recrearon monólogos. Los monólogos son producto de los estudiantes. También hicimos publicidad, donde los estudiantes hicieron sus carteles para dar a conocer e invitar a los turistas al municipio de Puerto Colombia. Todas estas actividades son modeladas por el docente inicialmente. Se les presenta a ellos la temática, cómo lo vamos a trabajar. Y luego ellos van desarrollando unos borradores porque ellos realizan el proceso de escritura que lo guardan en un portafolio. La idea es que ellos vayan conociendo su proceso de escritura y sean conscientes de cómo lo están trabajando. Posteriormente de que se hace la revisión, ellos pasan su borrador y lo dan a conocer a la comunidad educativa. Lo hacíamos a través de videos durante la pandemia. Ya en estos años en la presencialidad también se han realizado allá en la institución. Y se ha ido alternando la publicación de los videos de los docentes, invitando a los padres de familia, también con las producciones que han hecho los estudiantes allá en la institución. Este proyecto ha sido muy significativo, no solamente para la institución, sino también para la comunidad porteña, porque ha permitido conocer todas esas costumbres que tiene el municipio, que los estudiantes se sientan parte de esa comunidad, que se identifiquen con la comunidad y a su vez fortalecer esas competencias comunicativas orales y escritas. Además, los padres de familia se sintieron partícipes de esta, o se sienten partícipes de esta experiencia y se entusiasman al momento de realizar una actividad. Entonces ha permitido también la integración de toda la comunidad a este proyecto y eso ha sido muy bonito. Incluso los mismos padres de familia han manifestado este sentimiento. Y bueno, este es nuestro proyecto, lo trabajamos este año también con un cronograma acompañado del plan de lectura y escritura y oralidad. Este acompañamiento también nos ha permitido organizar nuestras actividades en la institución. Pues esperamos seguir desarrollándolo de esta manera para que siga teniendo el éxito y esta experiencia significativa siga llegando muy lejos y que los estudiantes también sientan esa misma satisfacción por el trabajo realizado. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, profe, por compartirnos su experiencia. Línea 2, leo con todos. La transformación de la sociedad se valora a través del desarrollo humano en diversos proyectos y procesos que se puedan convertir en una búsqueda permanente del saber, ser y deber ser, a través de espacios que permitan descubrir información de interés, en donde no solo prime el consumo, sino también la adquisición de conocimiento y el acceso a los recursos que permitan el desarrollo de ideas, experiencias y opiniones. En esta línea de acción, la Secretaría de Educación del departamento, a través de un equipo interdisciplinario, busca formar y acompañar a los agentes educativos, incluyendo muy especialmente a las familias y bibliotecarios de los establecimientos educativos oficiales en los municipios no certificados del Departamento del Atlántico, en proceso de promoción de lectura, escritura y oralidad, como una práctica sociocultural en pro de las habilidades comunicativas de los niños, niñas y jóvenes. Leer y escribir no son lujos ni obligaciones. Son derechos que deben garantizarse a los niños y las niñas de nuestro país para llegar a ser hombres y mujeres libres, ciudadanos y ciudadanas de un mundo en que las diferencias lingüísticas y culturales sean consideradas como riquezas y no como un defecto. Palabras de Emilia Ferreiro, quien lamentablemente falleció, pero nos ha dejado un maravilloso legado. Invitamos a la docente Lilibet Mesa de la Institución Técnica Comercial de Sabana Grande para que nos comparta su experiencia en esta línea.
Mi nombre es Lilibet Mesa, docente de la básica primaria, transición, una experiencia con los más pequeños, pero grandes de corazón. Es una experiencia tan hermosa que a través de los tiempos y con el apoyo de una muy buena administración, de una persona líder, como es nuestra secretaria de Educación, en el 25 de octubre del 2021, llega a nuestra escuela una iniciativa, un programa donde retomamos, de pronto hace muchos años existen las bibliotecas, pero una biblioteca que se ha convertido en cúmulos de libros, pues nuestras bibliotecas en manos de nuestra líder, nuestra secretaria, cobra vida y nos dice, ¿quieren una biblioteca? Pues nos preparamos en medio de la pandemia, en momentos donde todos estábamos recogidos, los maestros de la primera infancia, nos preparamos. Nos preparamos con CERLAT para hacer y retomar una muy buena lectura para la vida. Una lectura que comienza desde nuestro propio ser, desde nuestra propia casa, desde nuestra propia escuela y con la persona con quien convivimos. Es una experiencia maravillosa porque tú llegas como docente con un pensamiento previo. Tú tienes que llegar preparado. Tú tienes que saber utilizar esos libros. Tú tienes que tener un corazón abierto y adaptarte a la edad de los niños. He allí la gran importancia del docente y que jamás se alejará de nosotros. Cuando tú colocas tu corazón, cobra vida ese libro, cobra vida nuestra experiencia. ¿Y quiénes ganan? Todos, pero ganan más los estudiantes, porque ya los acercamos más a los libros, porque la tecnología ocupaba la parte principal y hoy se convierte en los libros los cuentos en el epicentro de este programa educativo. Cobra vida porque no estamos solo los docentes. Cobra vida porque están los niños, pero sobre todo toda la comunidad involucrada. Porque cobra vida cuando los niños tienen el afecto de sus padres. Sabana Grande, muchos años viene cambiando, igual que muchos lugares del departamento. Se hablaban de cultivo, los papás salían temprano a cosechar, a llevar el pan de cada día. Hoy se convierten en trabajadores de Barranquilla. Desde muy temprano vienen a Barranquilla, desde muy temprano y dejan los niños. Sabana Grande está distante de Barranquilla. Es un tiempo donde ellos buscan unos cuidadores e inclusive son sus abuelos o una persona que los cuide y garantice su cuidado. Y entre esos tenemos una jornada de trabajo los docentes de apoyar en ese trabajo, de cuidar nuestros menores, de cuidar nuestra infancia. ¿Cómo la hacemos? Buscando una educación integral. Cuando nos preguntan, ¿qué desean? Yo deseé tener una biblioteca. Gracias, doctora, en la oportunidad de decirlo. ¿Por qué? Porque a través de ella nosotros podemos tener muy buenas estrategias. Nuestra escuela ha reinventado nuestro proyecto escolar. Hemos, a través de la experiencia del libro, de esa aventura con los libros, pues nosotros hemos creado actividades como son la caja de sorpresa. Hemos tenido la oportunidad de vivir experiencias con el chef literario, un chef que nos ayuda a saborear la lectura. También hemos tenido la oportunidad de disfrutar, leo un cuento en casa. Nos imaginamos los docentes, el cuidador o los abuelitos contándoles en el patio debajo de un árbol. Un cuento maravilloso, pero no queda allí. Comienzan las dificultades, porque el docente siempre tiene que estar con la iniciativa de investigar qué está sucediendo, si es una realidad lo que estamos viviendo o es un sueño hecho realidad. Encontramos una falencia. Los niños no leían el cuento con sus padres. ¿Por qué? Porque no están con ellos todo el día. Despierta un trabajo que se nos convirtió en algo maravilloso, algo cómodo para ellos y para los padres, también poder descansar un poco de una jornada, pero estar dándoles calidad y afectividad y encuentro emocional con sus hijos, que es entre sábanas, leo un cuento entre sábanas y pijamas, donde se da la oportunidad de conversar, de trabajar y organizar, pero lo mayor oferta es conseguir de verdad una educación integral, que los niños sientan, emocionen, pero que también trabajen la parte cognitiva, reflexionando con sus padres y con el docente, la experiencia de haber leído en familia un cuento. Es una experiencia que escuchamos nosotros que desde muy temprano se debe trabajar. Cuando queremos excelentes hombres, mujeres, debe iniciar desde la casa. Solo los docentes sabemos que tenemos un tiempo, 10 meses, pero los padres, los hijos son para toda la vida. Nosotros apenas ocupamos un espacio y un pequeño tiempo como docentes, pero que sea docente de calidad. Despertemos esos libros, esa imaginación de nosotros de niños que no tuvimos la oportunidad y que hoy tenemos unos niños que en un año leen más de 100 cuentos. Muchas gracias y es una oportunidad para que ustedes sigan creciendo como docentes y como padres de familia. Cuidemos a nuestros niños. No podemos nosotros dejar al lado aprender sobre Gabriel García Márquez. Como estudiante de la Universidad del Norte, porque estoy estudiando maestría, es un regalo también de Dios, porque toda nuestra existencia tiene un regalo, una imaginación y un sueño. Entre los pasillos encontré algo que me emociona y lo tengo presente siempre en mi vida. Me gustaría compartirlo con ustedes y decirles, la vida no es lo que uno vivió, sino lo que uno recuerda. ¿Y cómo lo recuerda para contarlo? Yo todavía sigo jugando con mis estudiantes. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, profe, por su experiencia. Línea 3, leo para aprender. Leo para aprender plantea unas acciones para implementarlas en los establecimientos educativos con el propósito de brindar orientaciones a los docentes de preescolar a tercer grado de primaria, para dinamizar los procesos de aprendizaje de la lectura y la escritura a los estudiantes. Las acciones de esta línea permiten al infante sumergirse en el mundo de la lectura y adquirir destrezas que brinda la escritura, fomentando el desarrollo de la imaginación y la creatividad. Con esta estrategia, los estudiantes edifican continuamente sus propias explicaciones sobre lo que es leer y escribir a través de diferentes etapas de conceptualización, que le permitirán ir comprendiendo y logrando poco a poco el sistema alfabético de escritura. Cabe mencionar que esta estrategia se fortalece con los planteamientos de Emilia Ferreiro. Leo y escribo a través del maestro y leo y escribo por sí mismos. Invitamos a la docente Diana Llamas de la institución San José de Aguada de Pablo para que nos comparta su experiencia.
Muy buenos días. Muy bien. El cuento es el cuento. Vamos a empezar. El pájaro de mil colores. El cuento que voy a contarles ahora ocurrió hace muchísimos tiempos. Comienzo así. Nunca nadie en el bosque había visto un pájaro de mil colores. Era tan pequeño y bonito que no sabían de qué color era. ¿Café o de mil colores? Pero sus plumas eran de color tornasol. Bajo el brillo del sol, algunas veces parecía verde, otras veces parecía azul. ¿Allí están los pajaritos? Oh, sí. Sus plumas son tan hermosas como las flores, decía la mariposa. Sus plumas son tan hermosas como la mariposa, decían las flores. Los seres del bosque decían que las plumas eran de mil colores y los pajaritos eran tan felices. Vamos a colocarnos de pie, pajarito, un momentito, y allí cantaban. ¿Cómo cantaban? Excelente los pajaritos. Arriba los pajaritos, no los veo. Todos los pajaritos. Muy bien. Gracias. Continuando con esta línea, así como lo dijo la doctora Claudia, leo para aprender. Se centra en los principios de Emilia Ferreiro, cuyo planteamiento son leer y escribir a través del maestro y leer y escribir por sí mismo. Acabo de decirlo. Yo como docente leo a través del maestro. Acabo de contarles una historia pequeñita de un cuento de mis niños que les pareció sumamente hermoso este cuento. A través de este cuento ellos logran interiorizar y se les pregunta qué pasa, cómo son los pajaritos, qué pasó en la historia. Y entonces allí ellos entran en una imaginación y creatividad. La escritora Emilia Ferreiro cuenta en su teoría, los educadores deben construir saberes complejos al aprender a leer y a escribir. Esto, a su vez, implica que hay complejidad en la enseñanza. Y como maestros o maestras que somos, tenemos una cuota de responsabilidad cuando los estudiantes no leen o no escriben bien. Aquí estamos presentes nosotros para hacer ese trabajo. Por medio de la lúdica y por medio de esa metodología constructivista que dice Emilia Ferreiro. Se diseña la estrategia Leo, cuyas actividades le permiten a los niños sumergirse en la lectura y la escritura. Cada vez que yo voy a dar un cuento, como lo ven allí, en la parte de atrás, me imagino y me involucro en él. De manera creativa, lúdica, porque ellos aprenden de esa manera. Tengo grado primero en la institución educativa San José Aguada de Pablo y me ha dado resultados este proyecto Leo. Leo, escribo y la oratoria. Ya tengo niños leyendo, niños escribiendo en grado primero, la edad de 6, 7 años. Leer por sí mismo. Nos damos cuenta que la profe aquí, en esta, les lee, como acabo de hacerlo con ustedes. Los involucro, les pregunto y hago la lectura de una manera agradable y que ellos la entiendan. Acá, la felicidad de ellos, logrando en ellos que aprendan de cada uno de los cuentos. Es allí cuando la lectura se involucra todo lo que se va enseñando en grado primero. Empezamos con las vocales, luego los fonemas, luego las palabras, luego las oraciones y por último, ¿qué sería? Los párrafos y los cuentos. Allí están mis niños en esa categoría. Recordemos 3 líneas que tiene Leo para aprender y se basan en 3. El trazo continuo o el garabateo. Ellos empezaron garabateando. Ustedes también, ¿verdad? Claro que sí. Ningún niño aprende leyendo y escribiendo enseguida. No, ahorita lo dijeron los expositores. A los 7 años, y hay colegios que lo hacen antes. Luego las pseudoletras y luego el símil y las letras. He aquí algo que les voy a señalar. ¿Me permites? Gracias. Tengo este libro. Dice Mis creaciones. En él voy a tomar aprendiendo las vocales en grado primero. Aquí se le enseña su forma de leerla, de decirla fonéticamente. Y aquí dibujo. No sé. No te preocupes. Como lo hagas, está bien. Las vocales y seguimos aprendiendo las consonantes y sus sílabas. Grado primero. Y aquí empezamos las consonantes, dibujan a través de cuentos que se le van relatando. Si observan allá, me gusta llevarles material concreto que ellos vean lo que estamos trabajando. Y así hacemos todo ese bosquejo. Dice, mis primeros cuentos por dibujo y palabras aprendiendo a escribir, creando cuentos. Claro, el niño para poder empezar hace garabateo. Empezaron. Aquí está. Dibujitos, algunas palabras, pero ya los niños de San José Aguada de Pablo están aquí. Empezaron a escribir ya. Y aquí está. Producciones escritas de cuentos. Y yo quiero que alguien del público me haga el favor. Y vamos a leer este cuento que ya fue realizado por una estudiante de ese colegio. Sí, desde aquí. Claro, antes de empezar el cuento, yo hago todo el proceso que acabo de decir. Y para hacer los cuentos, que ya ellos plasman, yo a veces se los dejo en la imaginación, vamos a hacer algo, lo que ustedes quieran escribir. Pero hay momentos que les plasmo con imágenes, y ellos tienen que escribir. Aquí va un cuento.
Nombre Rusbelis Camacho, grado primero 3, 103. Érase una vez una niña que salió a pasear. Cuando iba caminando, se encuentra con una reunión de animales. Había un lindo búho pasando un palo, un tucán comiendo un lindo pajarito que tiene varios colores. Un papagayo, creo, con su cola abierta, y otro animal que no recordaba el nombre, pero le tomó una foto para llevarlo a la escuela y preguntarle a la maestra. Fin.
Ay, qué bonito.
Este es el cuento de la niña con sus palabras. Hay un poquito de pronto de ortografía y todo, pero ya en el paso a paso yo se lo voy a corregir. Estoy logrando en ellos, si se dan cuenta, hay varios, no traje todos porque no podía, hay varios niños ya escribiendo cuentos y la idea es al final hacer un libro. Voy a hacer un libro con los cuentos de los niños. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, profe. Excelente. Línea 4. Leo para triunfar. La gestión de conocimiento se entiende como herramienta clave del crecimiento de una organización mediante la identificación, disponibilidad y distribución. Por ello, la Secretaría de Educación del Atlántico, en el marco de su plan, diseña e implementa acciones que sirvan a la sociedad como insumo de información que desde el análisis de datos como niveles de impacto y efectividad de dichas acciones se puedan gestionar y generar nuevo conocimiento, aplicado a los procesos de lectura, escritura y oralidad en el territorio, a través de la línea Leo para triunfar. Para esta línea se propone principalmente la estrategia de incentivos, a la cual todos los docentes y establecimientos educativos podrán participar. Esta estrategia complementará una serie de estímulos bajo las siguientes acciones. Experiencias Leo, espacio que se deberá realizar cada año para la identificación y socialización de experiencias exitosas en Leo en el departamento. El desafío Maestro Pencora, espacio para que los maestros propongan soluciones a retos pedagógicos puntuales en la presentación de modelos de clases que contengan estrategias de enseñanzas creativas, efectivas y exitosas. Invitamos al rector de la institución Pánfilo Cantillo, el señor Moisés Martínez, para que nos cuente su experiencia y cerramos así este evento. Gracias.
Muy buenos días. Mi nombre es Moisés Martínez, rector de la institución educativa Pánfilo Cantillo Mendoza, ubicada en el municipio de Campo de la Cruz. Gracias, doctora Catalina, por la invitación. ¿En qué consiste nuestro proyecto que ya tiene 7 años? Empezó como una necesidad que nosotros nos dimos cuenta en la institución, y es que a través del análisis que se hacía de las pruebas saber y de las pruebas internas, nos dimos cuenta que el estudiante, los ítems donde se trataba de comprensión lectora, no les estaba yendo bien al estudiante y por ende no le estaba yendo bien a la institución. Venimos de una institución que estaba ubicada en la parte baja de las pruebas saber, estaba ubicada en la parte baja del ranking del departamento, y es así como vimos esa necesidad y después que nos percatamos de eso, entonces entre todos, entre los docentes, directivos, bueno, ¿qué vamos a hacer? ¿Cuál es la estrategia que vamos a utilizar? Y es así cuando empieza nuestro plan lector, que se llamó, en ese tiempo se llamó Leer es mi cuento favorito. ¿Qué hacíamos? Los profesores, nosotros compramos libros a una editorial y los estudiantes leían porque el proyecto estaba para leer 10 títulos al año. Entonces empezamos comprando 2 títulos para que el estudiante de ese año leyera 2 títulos. Entonces, la proyección era que un estudiante de primero que se leyera 2 libros cuando estuviera en quinto, ya por lo menos estaba leyendo 10, pero la proyección es que el estudiante se lea cada mes un libro, un título. Entonces, de esa forma nosotros nos fuimos desarrollando el proyecto y los estudiantes resolvían algunas guías, todo enfocado en los 3 niveles de lectura. Bueno, con ese proyecto tuvimos entonces ya a lo que le llamo despertar la autoconfianza en el estudiante. No solamente en el estudiante, sino en los docentes y por supuesto en la parte directiva. Ya nosotros nos empezamos a creer ese cuento. Y ahí tuvimos algunos incentivos, como por ejemplo, nos atrevimos a participar en un concurso nacional de la policía y con la niña Gabriela Hernández nosotros ganamos el primer premio y nos fuimos a recibir ese premio a la ciudad de Bogotá. Nosotros nos fuimos a recibir ese premio a la ciudad de Bogotá porque ganamos el primer premio, un premio nacional. Luego, con esa autoconfianza de todos y con ese sentido de pertenencia que a todos empezamos a sentir por la institución, también eso se empezó a reflejar ya en los resultados de las pruebas externas. Y es así como creo que es en el año 2017 que nos está la doctora Gina Parodi de ministra de Educación. La institución recibe el incentivo por haber subido en los 3 niveles de las pruebas saber. Entonces, nos cayó bien ese sueldo adicional que nos dieron a final de año. Entonces, todo eso nos ayudó a mejorar. Viene en el año 2019, viene entonces ya la pandemia, ¿verdad? ¿Qué nos dimos cuenta en la pandemia? Un 40% de los estudiantes no tenían cómo comunicarse. Era totalmente difícil la comunicación porque no tenían un teléfono inteligente, porque no había la forma de comunicarnos. Entonces, ¿qué hacemos? Tenemos este proyecto. ¿Qué hacemos? Seguimos nosotros todos los años alimentando el proyecto con los libros y entonces ahí el proyecto sube a otro nivel. Y es que ya los niños no van a ser solamente lectores y resolver una guía, sino que los niños les propusimos en plena pandemia escribir su propio cuento. Y escribir su propio cuento porque la editorial con que estábamos contratando nos dijo, ellos pueden escribir y nosotros le devolvemos a ustedes una contraprestación, se la devolvemos, pero en libros. Si los niños escriben los libros, nosotros le editamos los libros. Y aquí, entonces, los niños en plena pandemia participaron, recuerdo que participaron 83 niños, y de esos, los profesores entonces empezaron a hacerle su seguimiento, a ayudarlos. Muchas veces los conectores no eran, ahí estaban los profesores para ayudarlos, pero siempre la idea del estudiante se conservó. ¿Qué pasó con eso? Esos cuentos, esos 83 cuentos se hizo una preselección, creo que unos 60 y algo fueron a Bogotá, donde está la editorial, ellos lo traen ellos allá hacen entonces ya la selección y se escriben 30 cuentos. O sea, ya en el Pánfilo empezamos ya con 20 autores. Entonces, eso sí que nos aumentó esa autoconfianza, eso sí que nos aumentó la autoestima. Eso sí, siempre recuerdo algo que me dijo una profesora Noralba Orozco, que también es de lengua castellana. Ella me dijo, mijito, antes, cuando veníamos en el bus de Barranquilla para acá y me decían, ¿dónde trabaja usted? Yo decía, en la Inmaculada. La Inmaculada es el otro colegio. Pero yo quiero que me pregunten ahora, si vengo en la primera banca, pararme y decirle, en Pánfilo Cantillo, yo trabajo en Pánfilo Cantillo. O sea, ya todo, a través de este proyecto, nosotros nos estamos haciendo dueños nos estamos empoderando y nos estamos haciendo dueños de nuestra imagen, de la imagen de nuestra institución. Y es así como esa imagen ha seguido creciendo. Entonces, regresamos y seguimos con nuestro proyecto Bandera. Ese proyecto ya todo lo hemos en sueño, porque en verdad era un sueño, que nosotros tuviésemos un libro, que nosotros tuviéramos este libro, ya eso era un sueño. Entonces, seguimos y involucramos a otras áreas. Entonces, involucramos artística, involucramos informática. Los alumnos escriben, por eso es que nosotros estamos seguros que los cuentos son de ellos, porque los alumnos nos prestan la sala de informática por las tardes y ellos empiezan a escribir y empiezan a guardar y ellos entonces ya estamos con informática, estamos en valores. Si ustedes se ponen a leer los cuentos de Pánfilo, todos los cuentos terminan en una mejor situación, todos los cuentos, el bien le gana al mal, entonces estamos allí con los valores. Pero viene algo adicional, y es que nosotros en artística empezamos entonces a hacer un concurso paralelo para la carátula. Aquello era la foto del colegio, pero este es la portada que ganó. De 20 y tantos estudiantes que participaron, esta fue la portada que ganó. Esa sí la escogen los profesores de artística, y entonces eso ya va avanzando. Para el tercer libro está la portada, donde están los títulos de los libros que ellos se leen, incluyendo los libros de Pánfilo, y está el estudiante leyendo con mucho agrado. Está un estudiante leyendo con mucho agrado. Entonces, este tercer libro que se llama Construyendo Sueños, es un libro donde ya nos creemos, nos estamos creyendo el cuento. Todo el mundo se está creyendo el cuento. Y los estudiantes, para este año, que viene el cuarto libro, seguimos soñando. Ya viene el cuarto libro. Nuestros estudiantes ya están listos, ya los profesores están recogiendo. Ya tengo 3 docentes, no vinieron todos por obvias razones. Aquí están 3 profesores. Esos niños ya están escribiendo, los profesores están recogiendo los cuentos. Toca mandarlos a Bogotá para que para que hagan la selección, se coge el libro y se escuche un nuevo cuento. Entonces, para finalizar, ¿en qué queremos hacer énfasis? En que toda la comunidad educativa panfilista, nos estamos creyendo el cuento. ¿Por qué? Porque leer y escribir es nuestro cuento panfilista. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos la participación de la Secretaría Departamental de Educación y, por supuesto, a todos nuestros invitados nacionales e internacionales por sus valiosos aportes. A todos los asistentes, muchísimas gracias por su participación en esta primera jornada de la 11ª edición del Seminario de Educación e Infancia. Los esperamos a las 2 de la tarde en este mismo escenario para reanudar nuestra agenda del día de hoy. Feliz tarde.
Explora más contenidos de tu interés y no olvides suscribirte a nuestro canal.